Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. It's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
We are back with Fight Night Picks, getting ready for UFC 257. As always, one half of your co-hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. And Matt, as always, at Matt Allen FNP. We are so excited for a busy 2021. All thanks to you fans back in 2020. Explosive growth of the channel, and we couldn't have done it without you. So we really want to throw that one out to the fans out there. Appreciate the support with the likes and the subs. We're aiming for 20,000 by the end of this month. I think it's a doable and reachable goal. And Matt, we have an awesome card coming up this weekend on Saturday. The return of the Mac. You have Conor McGregor taking on Dustin Poirier in their long-awaited rematch in the main event. But Matt, littered through this card, a lot of really good fights. The co-main event, Dan Hooker, Michael Chandler, possible number one contenders match right there. And all the way down through, there's a lot of fights that are probably going to slip through the cracks with such a good main event. But Matt, we look at this card overall, and you can't help but get excited for this one.
Listen, the sport's always better when Conor McGregor is involved in it. And that might be a somewhat controversial thing to say, but I think we can both agree. Jon Jones, Conor McGregor, anytime those levels of stars are fighting, there's an added level of excitement. And the fact that this is a rematch of a fight that happened so long ago, Dustin Poirier has now become a big star himself, just outside of the Conor McGregor connection. So the fact that we're getting that rematch, probably not for a title, but I think we can both agree the winner's in line for a title shot. Phenomenal card, and we were both a little critical on this card originally. Just it wasn't the best card ever. It wasn't very stacked. They just had a great main event, but honestly, this is a really good card to get the year started off right.
Great one to start off the year. And Matt, let's flip it on over and talk about some possible fight of the night opportunities. And Matt, it's pretty difficult to not include your main event being such a big fight between Poirier and McGregor as a possible fight of the night. These guys definitely know how to get it done. You look at McGregor's stat line, and it almost surprised me being involved in the sport for so long. The guy has 22 pro wins, 19 of them by knockout. For Dustin Poirier, he can really get it done in a lot of different ways. And I mean, you know, we look at a fight like this for Poirier, you almost think that the blueprint's already there in beating such an accomplished striker. With his fight against Anthony Pettis, maybe that's one that you have to look out for and draw some parallels from it. But for Dustin Poirier, again, such a diverse striker, so many different ways to get it done. For Conor McGregor, it's been a mixed bag. I mean, and if you want to go back to 5 fights ago, that was almost 5 years ago, his fight against Nate Diaz, the first one that he lost. He comes back, wins the next one against Diaz, beats Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205. And then it's a very long layoff between fights. He comes out, fights Khabib, obviously loses that one. And then the win in his last fight against Cowboy Cerrone to kick off 2020. Obviously unfortunate that we didn't get the 2 or 3 fights out of McGregor that we had hoped in 2020. They're already kind of promising that we're going to get 2 or 3 out of McGregor in 2021. But it's hard not to consider this one, Matt, as a possible fight of the night here.
When was the last time Dustin Poirier didn't have a fight of the night? That's the real question we have to ask ourselves. Like, he is only involved in entertaining fights. Even the Khabib fight where he lost was still pretty entertaining for as long as it lasted, but he has wins over Max Holloway, former champ, Justin Gaethje, former champ, Eddie Alvarez ×2, former champs, Dan Hooker, not former champ, but still a very good fighter, coming off a fight of the year. And I love this matchup, mainly because when Conor came back against Cowboy, listen, Cowboy had been stopped a few times, and even if Conor won, there was going to be a lot of question marks just surrounding the outcome. If he beats Dustin Poirier, there can be no questions about it. Like, Conor McGregor's your number one contender if he can get over Poirier. And even Khabib has been saying that. And it's odd that Khabib himself has come out and really given Dustin Poirier kind of like, hey, if you can beat this guy, then you're good enough to fight me. So if Poirier can go out there and just look as good as he has looked really in his last 7-8 fights, he should be able to beat McGregor. But again, McGregor is one of the better strikers in MMA history. Don't think that's a wild thing to say. And it will be interesting, too. 2 primary boxers, and coming off the last main event that we just had, because we're recording these on Sunday, between Calvin Kattar and Max Holloway, this is going to be that level of an entertaining fight.
It should be a great one that you can definitely look forward to. And our other option for fight of the night, of course, we know that our main and co-main event, very high stakes in this lightweight division, but when you want to try and profile 2 great up-and-comers in this division, you don't have to look much further than the booking between Armenia's Arman Tsarukyan and Germany by way of Afghanistan's Nasrat Haqparast. And Matt, These two fighters have very contrasting styles, with Nasrat Haqparast coming out of that long southpaw stance. He's definitely known as a striker. And so far in his young career, only the 2 losses in the UFC, the first one in his debut to Marcin Held. And listen, I get it, a lot of people don't really hold Marcin Held in the highest of regards, but a very good grappler, and he was really out-grappled in that fight. His only other loss to Drew Dober is second to last time out. He unfortunately was a little bit too happy with his hands. He got finished by the cerebral fighter of Drew Dober. Now, Matt, for Arman Tsarukyan, this is a guy that at 22 years of age in a short notice UFC call-up, he drew Islam Makhachev. And I say that because Islam Makhachev, whether he's, a 15 to 20 fighter or a 15 to 10 type of fighter, he was just booked himself in a main event slot against Rafael dos Anjos, the former champ. And unfortunate that fell out. But all of that to say, not a lot of people like to take fights against Islam Makhachev. Arman Tsarukyan came in, took the fight. Yes, according to 2 of the judges, lost all 3 rounds. According to 1, he won the second round. But that was a fight of the night. It was an amazing fight. Arman Tsarukyan gave a great account of himself. Since then, big wins over Canada's Olivier Aubert-Mercier and Brazil's Davi Ramos. This kid, Arman Tsarukyan, is such a good grappler, such a good scrambler and wrestler. These two guys are very exciting fighters to watch. I think this has definite possibilities of providing not just fireworks, but a possible fight of the night here.
Without a doubt. And it is really interesting when you look at both guys' styles. Haqparast much more wrestling and boxing oriented. Of course, he can grapple. And I like what you brought up about the Held fight. I think the Held fight's kind of an important one to go back and look at when you look at this fight, because Haqparast was doing really well on the feet against Held. It's just in the grappling and some of those longer grappling exchanges, he was finding himself behind. Against a guy like Arman Tsarukyan, at only 24 years of age, he fights like someone who has a lot more experience and someone who's way ahead of their years, because Tsarukyan, listen, it's not like Islam Makhachev was only going to fight RDA in a main event. He was a minus 500 favorite going into a fight against a former champion. And this guy 2 years ago was like, yeah, I'll fight him on short notice. Not something you see really ever in the UFC. Really nice for Arman Tsarukyan, though, and Nasrat Haqparast. This is a really high-profile fight on a massive fight card, too, so hopefully the winner can get quite a bit of shine. But these are 2 of the more high-ceiling prospects you're going to find in the lightweight division.
Should be a great fight. Again, Arman Tsarukyan at this point just a shade over 24 years of age, with Nasrat Haqparast coming in at 25. Should deliver fireworks. Really looking forward to this one as a possible fight of the night. Of course, our fight of the night screen presented to you by Manscaped, and we'll talk about our balls later on in the show. But overall, this is a great card headlined by one of the best fights you're ever going to see. The long-awaited rematch, up a weight class, between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. It's a great card. It's one that we've really looked forward to for some time, and there's a lot of very important fights on this card. And overall, I couldn't be more excited for this. The return of MMA, the return of McGregor, it should be a great one.
Just the main event and the co-main event, because you always do the letter grade, make this card an A+. Like, Michael Chandler, one of the greatest fighters in Bellator history, is making his UFC debut. Conor McGregor, the biggest star in MMA history, is coming back, and he's fighting Dustin Poirier, one of the most exciting fighters in MMA history. So just that trifecta of fighters. I'm not even mentioning Dan Hooker, who just refuses to have boring fights. Phenomenal card. Just really excited for the return of MMA this week, and it's a great pay-per-view to kick off the year.
Should be a great one. And with that, make sure you check out all the content with Fight Night Picks. We got great podcasts, recap shows, early stoppage, all sorts of great stuff here on YouTube, but also as well, FightNightPicks.com, the new host for Fight Night Picks. We switched over to there. Josh Hart, rain and buckets from 3 for the team, helping out. We've got betting guides. We've got the store. You can check out the Fight Night Picks merch, and I ship it out as quick as I possibly can. So make sure you check out the website, FightNightPicks.com. Links down below in the description. And Matt, let's get into this card. And as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Really looking forward to our first fight on the UFC 257 prelims. We have the Prince Amir Albazi taking on Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And Matt, this is one of those fights, and we've said it for the longest time with Fight Night Picks, flyweight never die. And listen, you might see it out there on certain sites. With Amir Albazi, took on a short notice opponent in Malcolm Gordon his first time out. That one was at bantamweight, weighed in at 136 pounds, but usually he is a flyweight, taking on the former Fight Nights Global Champ in Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And if you have a look at Zhumagulov's run before he made it into the UFC, it was a 5-fight win streak. But really, the last few were very important. Wins over Tyson Nam by decision, Tagir Ulanbekov by decision, and Ali Bagwatinov those are very high-level wins, especially from what we've seen out of Tyson Nam in the UFC, from what we've seen out of Tagir Ulanbekov in his UFC debut. He's a close friend of Khabib Nurmagomedov. That was a huge win for Zhalgas Zhumagulov. And then the win over Ali Bagautinov, who had a big win on his own back on the regional scene just last weekend. I can't tell you how excited I was for Kazakhstan Zhalgas Zhumagulov to make his UFC debut. He was coming in against Brazil's Halion Paiva. And just to really set the stage, we've seen a lot of fighters representing Kazakhstan here lately. I know, there's some names that have had better success than others, but Shavkat Rakhmonov, I mean, what can be said about his win over Alex Oliveira in his debut? Maria Agapova, yes, she stumbled in her last fight against Shanna Dobson, but she's really looked good. And then the other fighter that we have debuting here shortly, Sergey Morozov, taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. So again, we've seen this kind of, real growth rate out of Kazakhstan with UFC caliber fighters. Zhalgas Zhumagulov, definitely one of those fighters. And in his last fight, it was a loss to Halion Paiva. But if you want to go back and have a look at that fight, I didn't think that he lost that one. I went over to MMA decisions because, again, it was a split decision loss. But if you look at, unanimous decision, all three judges scored at 29-28 for Paiva. Over on MMA decisions, one media member had it 30-27 Paiva. 3 had 29-28 Paiva. 16 had scored at 29-28 for Zhumagulov. And I think we were both in agreement there,
I saw it the same way. He did get out to a bit of a weaker start, but as the fight progressed, you could see him pick up steam. And I don't know if it was a case of octagon jitters, some people like to bring up a lot, but the fact that he did have that slow start and was able to really pick it up as the fight progressed, it's a nice thing to see out of a prospect, because I feel like we always talk about those hurdles that prospects have to get past. And not that he's an early in his career level prospect, he is 32, but he comes in the UFC, and cardio is the first big thing. How many prospects do we see come over and they get tired after a round, and everyone's excited, and then it just gets worse and worse? Came in, got better as the fight progressed. And for Albazi, it'll be really interesting to see how he wants to play this fight. If he goes for a lot of takedowns himself, Zhumagulov, and we were talking about this before, he's got this weird thing that he does. When he's on the offensive with his wrestling, he can take down pretty much anyone. He's got good wrestling trips from the clinch. He's got good single legs, good double legs, and he's good at chaining his wrestling together. But on the flip side, Amir Albazi does the same thing with his submissions, and I feel like that's an underrated thing that people don't ever bring up. Daniel Cormier loves to talk about, this is how you chain wrestling if you get someone up against the cage, and his commentary is phenomenal for it. But I don't think the chaining of submissions gets enough respect. I understand how in pursuit of submission, sometimes you will give up position. We saw that with Gilbert Burns against Tyron Woodley. He's in full mount, and he just kind of goes for a triangle choke. Sometimes those Hail Mary moves don't pay off, but for Amir Albazi, he's so crisp on the ground, and he has such a high fundamental understanding, really, of grappling. He can find submissions no matter where he is, and he can find them from really odd angles, too. And I think Zhumagulov really has to watch out if he's the one going for takedowns during this fight.
And these fighters fight in somewhat of a similar style, but there's major and key differences that you have to point out. So for Zhalgas Zhumagulov, when he goes and when he moves in there and starts to flow, it's a lot of 1-2 and then reset. 1-2 and then reset. And then if he's going to wrestle, he's a much more offensive wrestler than he is defensive. Defensively, there are definitely some holes there, and it's pretty tough to point out holes, especially fighters that have made it this far in their career. Again, former promotional champ outside of the UFC. But with Zhalgas Zhumagulov, when he's able to get the takedown, he's normally fishing from guard to side control. He's going to half guard. He's starting to land some blows. He's always trying to be positionally sound when he's on top. He's not really looking for the submissions, and you can see that so far out of the finishes that he has in his career. But Zhalgas Zhumagulov, very good with that offensive pressure, that good top pressure. Whereas Amir Albazi, and you saw it in his last fight, in his his UFC debut, the triangle that he was able to submit Malcolm Gordon with was absolutely insane. And Amir Albazi took on somewhat of a similar test in Malcolm Gordon to Zhalgas Zhumagulov. You've seen Malcolm Gordon's fights. Don't look at the UFC ones, because, the loss to Albazi wasn't very good. The loss to Sue Maderji definitely wasn't in his favor. That was pretty bad, especially with the stand-up. But Malcolm Gordon on the regional scene, you could see it. Offensive wrestling was there. His submission abilities were there. And on the feet, he was pretty heavy-handed, at least. Especially in the Yoni Sherbatov fight, if you want to go back and see that one. And he even got caught in that one. But for Amir Albazi, always working something. And you saw that on a lot of his regional fights, whether it was with Bellator, whether it was with Brave. And I know he lost that fight against Jose Shorty Torres with Brave, but you really have to go back and watch that fight because it was a lot of back and forth. It was a very, very close fight. It was a unanimous decision win for Torres, But Albazi definitely had his moments in that one, and I think that's more of a loss that you can learn from than anything that you lose stock in.
100%. I agree with that 100%. And we heard that a lot from the commentary yesterday, how, oh, well, Holloway, he lost to Volkanovski, and he really used that to get better. I think that fight for Albazi was the case. He lost to Torres, and Torres didn't really get enough credit for his UFC run because it wasn't all that great, but him coming into the UFC, he was one of the more hyped up prospects regardless of weight class, and the fact that it was a really hyped up flyweight really means something. Albazi, he takes the L in what was a really back and forth fight, and ever since that we have seen a huge progression in his game. So I love the submission skills of Amir Albazi, but this fight is a very, I'll say, evenly matched, because on the feet, Albazi, I wouldn't say has the power that Zhalgas does. But again, the Zhalgas, the lack of activity really does worry me. And the longer this fight progresses, I understand he did well against Paiva, but that was because he was able to secure the takedown himself. And I don't really think we're going to be seeing a lot of offensive wrestling from Zhalgas in this fight. We saw what Amir Albazi was able to do against a guy like Malcolm Gordon, who I wouldn't say he does represent a decent mirror, I guess, for Zhalgas. He's just not really as good. And the fact that Amir Albazi was able to finish him so early on in his fight is a really good sign, fighting another similar style to his last one against Gordon. I like Amir Albazi in this fight. I'm not going to lie.
It's a lot of fun if you have a look at this fight. There's a lot of different things that you can try and break down, a lot of different talking points. But if you look at it, this fight was actually supposed to take place once last year, passed over, canceled back in November. Now we have it here in January. If we have a look at the odds, I was a little bit surprised on this one. Albazi opened at minus 105, just a slight underdog. He's now a plus 102. For Zhalgas Zhumagulov, open to minus 115, now at a minus 126. And over on Tapology, it's a limited sample size, but 614 total votes, 81% going Albazi, 65% have him to win by decision. Does any of that surprise you at all?
A little bit, honestly, and I can read the comments already. Oh, Zhalgas coming off a loss and Albazi's coming off a win. That's why you're picking him. We both agree that he probably should have beat Paiva in his last fight. I wouldn't take a lot from that fight just because stylistically they are so different. Albazi's ground game is absurd, though. I really can't stress that. Like, he's got such a unique way of grappling, and it's not that Charles Oliveira is my favorite grappler to watch in MMA because he just floats on top of people and they're moving and they're trying to struggle, and it just seems like nothing ever bothers him. With Albazi, he's the one doing that, but from top position, and just it's an exciting style of grappling to watch.
And I mean, if you look at Amir Albazi, 8 of his total wins are by a first round finish, including his last 2 wins as well. The other thing too, if you want to focus on it, Amir Albazi was actually matched up back in the fall to take on Raulian Paiva that got the win over Zhalgas Zhumagulov. Unfortunately, Paiva had to withdraw from that one. And like I said, the bout between these guys scheduled for November, it was canceled. Now we have it here. Zhalgas Zhumagulov coming out of a good camp out of Arlan MMA Pro Team. Maybe go check out that camp if you get the chance. Tapology's a little wishy-washy. Instagram's probably your best spot to find them. But a lot of really high-level fighters there, including our guy, Zhalgas Zhumagulov. It is a tricky one to try and predict. Again, if Zhumagulov's going to win, you really have to try and string things together on the feet. But it's a little difficult, and I want to focus on it because again, you can't draw a lot of parallels from the main event that we had last weekend between Holloway and Kattar, but the one thing that Max Holloway was never doing, he would never really try and reset. You're always just throwing something. Zhalgas Zhumagulov is one of those fighters, and I mentioned it earlier, he always resets. 1-2 reset. If Albazi's able to go out there on the feet and really try and disrupt the rhythm of Zhumagulov and then try and work the submission abilities, there's a lot of opportunities for him in that fight. So while it is a very close fight on paper, it is a very close fight in terms of the odds, I'm going with the underdog here in Amir Albazi to pick up his 2nd win in the UFC. Overall, both of these guys, great prospects, I guess. You're kind of really starting to pass through that threshold of being a prospect, but both of these guys with good ceilings. I just like Amir Albazi in this one.
I can't disagree with really anything you just said. The only edge that I'll give to Zhalgas is if Amir is kind of forcing the issue, if he isn't able to get the takedown, and if he is just walking into distance, he might walk into a big shot at some point. That's the only thing I'd really worry for Amir Albazi. I do like the overall game of Albazi. I like his ceiling too, and flyweight's in this weird position because there is only about 17 fighters in the whole division, so 1 or 2 wins can really move you up, and I just like Albazi moving forward.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have Sweden's Amir Albazi to get the win. Overall, a great card, headlined by 2 big-time lightweight fights. Dan Hooker welcoming Michael Chandler to the UFC, and we have the return of the Mac, Conor McGregor, taking on Dustin Poirier in the rematch. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. We have Nick the Carney Lentz in his 2nd booking this month, taking on Movsar Evloev. And if you have a look at the Tapology page, the UFC page of Nick Lentz, He had a booking earlier on in the month. Unfortunate that one was canceled. He was supposed to be taking on England's Mike Grundy. Grundy and his team out due to COVID issues. In steps Russia's Movsar Evloev as a huge favorite, I might add, in this fight. And Matt, in our original analysis of the Grundy fight with Nick Lentz, it's kind of similar in the Movsar Evloev fight, just due to the fact that all three of those fighters, A, have connections between them, but B, they're all wrestlers of different sorts. Nick Lentz in this fight, a Division I fighter out of the University of Minnesota from back in his college days. Movsar Evloev, a master of sport in Greco-Roman wrestling, and for what it's worth, you had a Commonwealth Games medalist in Mike Grundy, who's already had a fight against Movsar Evloev. It just happens to be that was Movsar Evloev's last fight in a win. And for Mike Grundy, broke his jaw in that fight. Movsar, obviously, again, the winner. For Nick Lentz, though, when he was going to be taking on Mike Grundy, we had mentioned the fact that Nick Lentz really sneaky chokes, and I get it, out of his last 3 fights, he's only 2-3. But you look at the level of competition. A loss to David Tamor, one of the Tamor brothers. Watch out for your underwears. Another loss to Charles Oliveira, 0-3, if you don't count the no contest. And a loss to Arnold Allen by decision, his last one. Nick Lentz has talked about it out in the media. The fact that after the Arnold Allen fight, he had major eye issues, was almost thought to possibly lose an eye. But coming back here in competition, down at featherweight, and you have to really throw that one in here, this is a very good fight, and it's a very interesting fight here.
I don't think this is a very good fight. Nick Lentz versus Mike Grundy would have been a good fight because you had Grundy, I had Lentz. We can agree. It's a close fight. This is not going to be that. And I know I'm kind of giving my prediction away early, but you saw what Movsar Evloev was able to do to Mike Grundy. And I do think Nick Lentz, again, I thought Nick Lentz was going to beat Mike Grundy. But my main key for that fight was Mike Grundy's going to be shooting on Nick Lentz, not the other way around. And Nick Lentz has a phenomenal guillotine. It's just one of those submissions where he's got a great feel for it. No matter where you are, he can hit it. Movsar Evloev's not going to even give him the opportunity to get into that position. He's too smart of a grappler and too smart of a wrestler, to be quite honest. He's not going to just shoot for lazy double legs and get his head in bad positions. He can clinch, he can get single legs, and the thing I really like about Evloev too, if he knows he won't get the takedown, he won't just exert energy still going for more takedowns. And we talk about chain wrestling. I think he's a very smart chain wrestler where if he can get that one leg and he feels like you are off balance, he will start to go for other submissions. Takedowns. But if he notices that, okay, this isn't going to work, he is defending it quite well, he'll just reset and find another entry. And that's something you don't see a lot from wrestlers. It's, okay, the second I'm within range, I'm now in wrestling mode, and I'm just going to keep that up. Evloev is really smart where he won't tire himself out doing that. It's a big problem. I know we're going to talk about it with old Andrew Sanchez later, but really good wrestlers have this knack where I'm so good at wrestling, I'm so good at wrestling, I'm so good at wrestling. I end up tiring myself out. And it's really, like, Justin Gaethje doesn't wrestle in fights because wrestling makes him more tired than striking does. Evloev won't get into that issue, whereas I'm going to out-wrestle Nick Lentz for 2 rounds, and then that veteran savvy of Nick Lentz might be able to be sort of the equalizer in the third. I don't really know what Nick Lentz can do in this fight to keep Evloev off of him. I know in the Gray Maynard fight, and in Gray Maynard's prime, you might be able to argue he fought a little bit like Evloev, but Gray Maynard's prime was when I was in middle school, so that was over 10 years ago. He beats the brakes off him. I like the Scott Holtzman win, but Scott Holtzman's not a wrestler, and he doesn't really have good takedown defense, so the way in which Nick Lentz beat Scott Holtzman, I will admit Holtzman's a nice win, but the way he was able to beat him is really the blueprint for a lot of guys. It's not like he went out there and spinning back-fisted him like he was Benil Dariush. I think there might be a few different areas. If Nick Lentz can catch him with a really nice crisp hand, he might be able to hurt him and then start going for his own wrestling game. I just don't really know what Nick Lentz is going to be able to do to get this fight in a position where he can win it.
It's really tricky, if you're trying to pick out ways in which Nick Lentz can win. And if you want to go back to, again, another good win, the Will Brooks win. And I know we talk about it here with Fight Night Picks. There's a Will Brooks picture here somewhere in the office. He is here. But former Bellator champ, again, has wins over, the guy that's in our co-main event coming up tonight, and Michael Chandler. But that was a good win for Nick Lentz. But again, that one was up at 155 pounds. And that's the thing. Nick Lentz has bounced between 55 and 45 for a majority of his career. And he has good wins here and there. It's just really tricky to try and figure out a way for Nick Lentz to beat such a dynamic guy like Movsar Evloev. Because for me, I look at Evloev as a guy that M1 champions that have come into the UFC have really been a mixed bag. I mean, let's start picking on some of them. You've got a guy like Alexander Volkov at heavyweight. Well, he was good with M1. He's been good with UFC. You've got a guy like Marcin Tybura. Well, he's been all right. Then you've got guys like Roman Bogatov.
Don't ever talk shit about my boy Marcin again.
A one-hitter quitter against, my big guy, Leonardo Santos, but he kept hitting them in the nuts, and then he got kicked out of the UFC. But you really have had a mixed bag of M1 champions so far. Movsar Evloev, he's just a shade under 27 years old. This is a guy that I think we'll see ranked at 145 pounds, and it seems like a fight that's a no-brainer for him to take because he's similar to a lot of fighters that, and we talked about this before he came on air, that have somewhat mastered a skill set. And for Movsar Evloev, you're a master sport in Greco-Roman wrestling, but we've seen the proofs in the pudding with his fights. He is such a good wrestler. He's so good in the scrambles. He's going to beat the majority of the fighters that he goes up against and wrestles. And I say that like all the way up the chain at 145 pounds. Like I could see the Volkanovski.
Okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit.
Volkanovski's going to give him a hard time. You can go down through 45. There's going to be guys that give him a hard time, but this guy is a great wrestler, and he's going to really hang with a lot of the best of them. The other thing that he's really brought together, especially training out of Tiger Muay Thai, and we've seen him spend time in American Top Team as well. I love how he's starting to round out his game and really add to those strikes that he's able to throw in the cage. He throws a lot of spinning stuff. He throws a lot of nice kicks as well. He's one of the more dynamic guys that we have in the UFC. So again...
Were you guys childhood friends?
Me and Movsar, Craig and Movsar. If we have a look at the odds, I said, Matt, this is one of the biggest discrepancies that we have. Movsar Evloev open a minus 400 favorite. He's now minus 440. For Nick Lentz, open a plus 300. He's now a plus 328. And if we have a look at the votes on Tapology, 405 of them so far, 92% going with Evloev, 79% pick him to win by decision. Now, Matt, we have to say, back last weekend, you had the Cater Holloway card. The main card opened up with 3 huge underdogs cashing in a row. So it makes you a little bit leery, but I really do like the heavy favorite in this one in Movsar Evloev. It's one of those fights where, again, he's too much of a favorite for me to want to throw him on a parlay or to really even have him as a single, but I do like him to get the win here because, again, I've really kind of shown it early on, me and my childhood friend Movsar.
I was going to say, you basically said he could beat Edson Barbosa.
I've been high on Movsar Evloev for a long time, so it's hard not to pick him to win in this fight.
I agree with pretty much everything Craig said. He got a little wild with the Movsar Evloev praise near the end of that, but I do agree. Nick Lentz is a good litmus test. You know he's a tough guy. He's a good wrestler. He's a good striker, and he will show you. We're going to learn a lot about Movsar Evloev in this fight. He will face at least some adversity, I'm sure. He's going to be going for takedowns, and Nick Lentz is going to have a good defense for them. He's going to get hit on the feet. But from what we saw from those underdog wins last weekend, it was a lot of striking matchups, and against strikers, anything can happen. Anyone can knock anyone out at any time with one punch. Between two grapplers, a little bit different. It's harder to just catch a guy in a guillotine or just catch a guy in a triangle choke. I really like Evloev in this fight.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We're both going with Russia's Movsar Evloev to get the win. Our next fight, Aldierte Sanchez take on Makmud Muradov. That should be a great one. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. I'm really looking forward to our next fight. At middleweight, we have Aldierte Andrew Sanchez, former Ultimate Fighter winner, taking on the Money Team's own. Yes, you read that or heard that correct if you're following along with subtitles. Makmud Muradov. And Matt, I love this fight. I mean, Makmud Muradov is on an unprecedented win streak going back to his regional days. He had beaten UFC level competition to make it into the dance. Alberto Uda and Wendell Oliveira were the 2 wins in Octagon that got him into the UFC. And so far in the UFC, wins over Alessio Di Chirico that we saw really ruin a hype train last weekend, getting the win over Joaquin Buckley.
He might have had the worst post-fight press conference ever. I'm sorry, Alessio, but I couldn't get behind your message.
Yeah, you don't interview a guy that gets brutally knocked out. And for Muradov, he had a big win over Trevor Smith his last time out there. And it was a fight where Trevor Smith just got frustrated. He kept trying to close the distance, but Muradov, I don't know if I've ever seen a boxer type have such good foot movement from Makmud Muradov because he's very light on his feet. It's not like he does the Muhammad Ali shuffle, but man, he could. Like, his footwork's so good.
No, he does. And just the one little short point for me, L-stepping. Not something you see a lot in MMA, but in boxing, of course, you do. Max Holloway used it really to perfection against Calvin Kattar. He had that one moment where he was saying he's the best boxer ever. That's all he did to get out of the way of the punches. You take one step back, you take one step to either the right or the left. It sounds very simple, but no one in MMA does it. And the fact that we are starting to get, I won't say high-level boxers, because I won't disrespect the sport of boxing that way, but we are starting to see guys in MMA use actual boxing techniques that were never around, I'll say up until like 2015. It's kind of like with calf kicks. Calf kicks are the new 3-pointers in MMA all of a sudden, and we're starting to see jabs are being incorporated a lot more into MMA. We're starting to see a lot more footwork being used as an offensive tool as well as a defensive tool. And Makmud Muradov, for being so young in his UFC career, is showing a lot of those X-factor skill sets that you don't really encounter until you do look at the top of the division.
And for Makmud Muradov, 2020 really stalled him out. He was originally booked with Shoeface. He was booked with Carl Roberson, Krzysztof Jotko, and then Kevin Holland. Unfortunately, he was forced out of the fight with Kevin Holland. So in steps Andrew Sanchez. And this is a guy that he came in on the Ultimate Fighter and really just kind of took the world by storm. Won it at light heavyweight, finished it off with a great decision win over Carl Roberson. Or sorry, not Carl Roberson, Khalil Rountree. And in that fight, he went back to his strengths. He really wrestled well, really put on a good pace over Rountree. Wins on that season over Phil Hawes that a lot of people are still excited about in the UFC, and Eric Spicely, and he knocked him out in the first round. And listen, Eric Spicely had a bad time out last weekend, and he was really looking to punch his ticket back into the UFC for a third time. But for Andrew Sanchez, the blueprint has been, or had been, this guy is an NAIA two-time wrestling champion. He goes to his wrestling, and if he strikes, he's probably going to wear himself thin. And if you really want to go back into a fight that accentuates that, it's his UFC second time out with the UFC, because he picked up a win as well over Trevor Smith. That was in his UFC debut, I guess, after winning the Ultimate Fighter. His fight against Anthony Smith, where he beat the brakes off of Anthony Smith for 2 rounds, and then in the third round, his cardio fell off a cliff.
And you know that game in The Price is Right where it's like, lo-de-doo-de-do-de-doo-de? That's his cardio in the third round. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Because you look at Andrew Sanchez throughout those first 2 rounds, really pick any fight. We're only taking out the ones that he lost in the third, but any Aldirte fight, he looks great. He's a good wrestler. He looks into it, and he looks like he has really good cardio because the type of takedowns he goes for, very high impact, very explosive versions on takedowns. Then he wrestles himself into exhaustion. It's that Malcolm Gordon, Andrew Sanchez. It's going to be known as the Andrew Sanchez theory from now on.
Hopefully it's not like a partly Canadian thing
Hopefully
either.
not. Okay, now I'm a little worried. But for Sanchez, the striking is a weak point. It's just, I think his wrestling's almost too good for his own case. And you look at his wins. So he beats Trevor Smith, not really a guy who can take advantage of his cardio in the third round, because that's what a lot of this comes down to. If you have decent power and a good gas tank, you can beat Aldirte. The people who do struggle with him are other guys who do have cardio issues themselves. You look at the Marcus Perez fight. He's beating up Perez, but they both get tired in that third round, and he's just able to do enough to not get finished. Marc-Andre Barriault, it was a fight that happened. It wasn't great.
But in that one, it was the same thing.
Exactly.
Power bar Marc-Andre Barriault to win, he has to wear on guys. He got outworn in that one. You go and watch the Marvin Vettori fight, and from the first, like, as soon as they tap him in and they get ready, Marvin Vettori's on Andrew Sanchez, and that's how he was able to win. It was just pressure, volume. He had Andrew Sanchez hurt in about the first minute in that one, and just from jump, he was able to get the win. And then the fight against Wellington Turman, that was a really interesting one. And we saw a bit of a progression from Andrew Sanchez the last 2 fights. Because again, where it used to be a lot of wrestling, he switched things up. He went to TriStar. And we've seen a lot of fighters not have success that have gone to TriStar lately.
We never thought we'd say that sentence, first of all. 2 people growing up in Canada throughout the heyday of GSP. And now TriStar, it's not that it's a bad gym by any means. It's just, listen, gyms go through ebb and flows. They go through ups and downs. But right now is a bit of a down for the gym.
So for Andrew Sanchez, he went to TriStar, and then all of a sudden he became like a point fighter in karate. And you saw it in the fight against Marvin Vettori. You saw Sanchez come out, and he still had his hands high, but it was a nice wide stance, and he's moving well. The fight against Wellington Turman, I mean, if I could stand up and show you this, I would. I'd love to start doing more stuff like that. But in that fight, hands super low. He cocked him low, but he kept his hands low, and he moved back and forth and really stayed on the balls of his feet. Those two both struck. He did get hit a couple of times by Turman, but by the end of that first round, knocked him out pretty well cold, hit him with a really nice hand early on in that one. That's the weird thing. He's become this point fighter, karate type fighter in his last 2, but we know that he has that wrestling in his back pocket. That's what makes this fight so interesting, because for Makmud Muradov, again, I don't know if I've seen a boxing type in MMA find so much success. This should be a great one.
It really should be. Here's the thing. Hey, Andrew, cut the don't come out here and start fighting like a karate fighter. This is not the fight you want to be testing your striking skills against, because Makmud Muradov, he has good takedown defense. Here's the thing, though, for Sanchez. if he is getting success early on, if he is having a lot of success with his wrestling, he's going to stick to that game plan throughout the fight. I really doubt he is going to go out there and try to strike with Muradov, because if you've watched any of Muradov's fights, not only does he have the power, he has a nice diversity in his strikes too. We talk about the boxing, not afraid to mix his kicks in too. It's weird too, because for Muradov, it seems like his striking has become more MMA striking as he's progressed throughout his career. Because you go back and watch some of his early fights, because I was curious, like, okay, what did Floyd Mayweather see in Makmud Muradov? He's pretty good. It's just, you see that he does have the power, he does have the crisp boxing, but he has slowly incorporated more MMA techniques into his game. Just something you have to watch out for, because if Sanchez is going for a lot of takedowns, it's not like Muradov can't meet him with a knee, he can meet him with an uppercut. Like, the diversity of strikes that Muradov has is more than just a boxer who's now in MMA.
Yeah, I mean, such a great fighter, definitely deserves this shot. You get a win over a former Ultimate Fighter winner. That's definitely a telling sign, and it really could win you over with a lot of fans. So in this one, if we have a look at the odds, Sanchez opened the minus 179 average favorite on best fight odds. He's now a plus 109 underdog. It's the biggest shift in the odds that we've seen so far in this card. For Muradov, open to plus 149. He's now at a minus 134. And if we look at the overall Topology votes, Matt, 563, 86% have Muradov to win, and 72% have him to win by knockout. Here's the weird thing. For Andrew Sanchez to win this fight, he has to revert back to the style that he came into MMA with that caused him issues, and cardio issues at that. So it's a bit of a pretzel in the mind if you're trying to think of it that way. For Makmud Muradov, for him to win, he just has to do what he always does. And that's where it gets really interesting. For me, this is a fight that I've kind of gone back and forth with. I think that we might disagree with this one. So obviously, I'm not going to put this one on my card because I don't feel overly certain with both guys. I mean, for Andrew Sanchez, he almost figured out the cardio thing. He beats Perez. He beats Barrio. You lose to Vettori. Well, there's no shame in that loss. Like, I think if Martin Vettori fought Makmud Muradov, I would favor Vettori to win that fight 10 times out of 10.
He just beat Jack Hermansson in a 5-round fight. So
and the Sanchez win over Turman is great, but that style doesn't work against Makmud Muradov.
No, it doesn't. And it's an interesting case, too, because when you look at Andrew Sanchez's losses, a lot of them could just be summed up to, well, he's beaten not that great fighters, and he loses to the elite. But there is more of a story to be told throughout those fights, because he will have success even when he does fight those upper-tier, upper-level guys. It's just, again, the cardio is such a big question mark for him. I'm going to pick Muradov in this fight. Here's the thing, though. I'm going to pick, Muradov's probably going to win. And here's why. I almost switched my picks. That tells you how confident I am. If Sanchez gets off to a really good start, I think it's going to be the worst thing for him. If he does go back to that wrestling style, I think Muradov has good enough takedown defense to at least make Andrew Sanchez work. I think he's going to get taken down at some point throughout this fight, but he is going to make Sanchez work, and that's all you need to do when you fight a guy like Andrew Sanchez. Maybe I'm too hyped up about Makmud Muradov, but I do really like his ceiling.
We talked about this in the first fight of the night with Zhalgas Zhumagulov. The fact that it's 1-2 reset. With Makmud Muradov, he'll throw combinations, and you talked about the L-step too. He does normally take a second to place his hands and reset. Maybe Andrew Sanchez, that's when he can crash forward and work a takedown.
But the issue is when he does reset, and you did it perfectly, when he resets, he does drop his hands, which is great for him. Because, again, Sanchez is going to have to be the aggressor in this fight, because he's either going to have to close distance to get the takedown, or he's going to stand way too far on the outside, and neither guy's going to be close enough to engage. Because for Muradov, yes, he has kicks, but his hands are his primary weapon. And if Sanchez is kind of dancing around playing that Caitlin Chukagian game, he's going to get cracked at a certain point. Like, the most aggressive version of Andrew Sanchez is going to win him this fight, but also lose him this fight.
That's the thing. So I'm actually going to go with Andrew Sanchez in this one. Again, that wrestling background, from what I've seen in his UFC fights, you can kind of draw some comparisons in some of these ones. The win in the Ultimate Fighter is a huge one over a primary striker, or at least now Bangkok ready, Khalil Rountree. But in that one, again, it was the takedowns that won him the fight. He beats Trevor Smith. He loses to Anthony Smith, but he was winning the fight until he lost it. So for me, I'm going with Andrew Sanchez in this one. It's my second underdog through 3 fights, so maybe that's going to be a sign to come. But overall, I love this fight. This is really going to tell us a lot about both of these guys. Will Andrew Sanchez kind of be what we've known him to be, or will Makmud Muradov win one over and he's exactly who we thought he was? So overall, I'm really looking forward to this fight. I have Andrew Sanchez by way of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Matt, you have Uzbekistan's Makmud Muradov. I love this fight. I love this card. There's a lot of great fights coming up, including our main event between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. The rematch. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Big time banger at light heavyweight. We have Bangkok ready. The Warhorse, Khalil Rountree Jr. taking on Poland's Marcin Prachnio. Matt, for Marcin Prachnio, it's just been the in the UFC. 0-3, all 3 of his losses by first round finish. The debut against Smiling Sam, the second time out against Magomed Ankalaev, the third time's the charm was against Slow Mike Rodriguez back this summer. And it's been a weird career, I guess I should say, for Marcin Prachnio. And the really weird thing is, the UFC doesn't normally take a flyer on a fighter coming out of one championship. But this was kind of at the same time as, was Ben Askren going to come over to the UFC? Well, we ended up with Marcin Prachnio. And at the time, he was 13-2. He had, quite a few wins by first round knockout. The big win over Gilberto Galvao was the one that won him over with a lot of fans and the UFC, and that's how we ended up getting him. And a very similar stylistic matchup between Galvao and Khalil Rountree in the fact that very high stances, both southpaws, both hit really hard. Again, Khalil, much more of a tie striker at this point in his career, which was a weird career change for him. But in that fight, Prachnio gets dropped by the first punch, and he comes back and rallies and gets the win. But again, in the UFC, the fight against Sam Alvey, he gets cracked, 6 ways to Sunday.
If we ever have an award for most unintentionally hilarious knockout, that would win it.
If you watch that fight against Sam Alvey, Prachnio is rocked, and he walks all the way across the cage. Sam Alvey stands there, and from the offside...
Like he's carrying groceries, too, hands down by his sides.
Alvey just hits him with one hook. Prachnio drops like a sack of potatoes and gets knocked out. He fights Magomed Ankalaev, and the fight wasn't fair. It shouldn't have been one that happened. You know how good Ankalaev is, but they reference that Paul Craig loss. You got to get Ankalaev back on a win, so you give him Marcin Prachnio. In that one, Prachnio was a plus 415 underdog, and Ankalaev won a performance bonus. In the fight against Mike Rodriguez this summer, he was plus 195 underdog, and he got finished in the first round again. And for Marcin Prachnio, when he gets in tight with somebody, he almost kind of shells up. Sometimes he'll go and he'll get a little wild, and then he gets hit. And if he shells up, he gets hit. And the only way for him to win, and again, he's a black belt in karate, he's got to rely on his movement, and he's got to rely on his kicks. And you'll hear it all the time, especially if you go back and watch his one championship fights. He's got a great high kick, whether it's from southpaw or from orthodox. He just never really sets them up, and he hasn't really had a chance to throw them. So I understand a lot of people are very down on Marcin Prachnio, and rightfully so. 3 big losses in a row, all 3 by first-round knockout. For Khalil Rountree, the guy that came in off The Ultimate Fighter Season 23, had a loss to Corey Hendricks, had a loss to El Dierte in the finale, and then lost his first fight in the UFC to Tyson Pedro. Well, then you just kind of think, well, this guy's pretty well shot. Well, he wins 2 in a row by first round finish. He loses to Michael Olszewczuk, and that one considered a no contest, but he got beat quite badly. Olszewczuk tested positive for the performance enhancers. So then you have Khalil come out. He beats Gokhan Saki, one of kickboxing's best. He loses to Johnny Walker by first round finish, and then he goes away for a little bit. And when he comes out to fight Eric Anders,
for a while.
When he fights Eric Anders, it's like when Jorge Gurgel came out to fight KJ Noons. This is a whole different ballgame. Because all of a sudden, Khalil came out from that southpaw stance.
That high knee.
And we're going full Muay Thai Khalil, and he beats the crap out of Eric Anders. It was an absolute drubbing. I wrote down the scores in that fight, Matt. They were insane. Where did I write them? 3 30-26s in that one. He beat the brakes off of Eric Anders. And then he came out against Iwan Kutsalaba with the same game plan, and he gets starched.
So there are 2 very different versions of Khalil Rountree, and it's weird because going into the Gokhan Saki fight, Gokhan Saki, one of the better kickboxers really ever, and the story was Khalil Rountree kept on saying, he's a better kickboxer, but I'm a better boxer. I'm a better boxer. I'm a better boxer. And it was like part of his identity, like I'm a boxer in MMA. He goes out there, starches Saki. It is kind of interesting. If you are really good at boxing, you can beat a kickboxer. You just got to close the distance. Loses to Johnny Walker terribly. And it was interesting, too, listening to him talk about his transition going to Thailand to start training, because in the Walker fight, he gets in that Thai clinch, and Walker just destroys him with the elbows on the feet. And that's when Khalil decided, okay, I got dominated in that position. I'm just going to change everything. And not just I'm going to change everything from a stylistic standpoint, from a personal side of things. Like, he moved to Thailand to become a better fighter.
And that's the thing. We always used to see on Khalil Rountree's Instagram, and a little bit of inside baseball, we get asked this question a lot. How do you guys research for fights? What do you do? It's a combination of Fight Pass, YouTube, Facebook, Fight TV, get mad at each other, argue about it, but we try and find tape in all different ways. We watch a lot of interviews. You go through the topologies. You don't rely too much on the stats, but Instagram, too, is a good spot where you can learn now. You can get caught into a trap like Thiago Santos before he fought Glover Teixeira. You watch him do a bunch of capoeira. You watch him do a lot of grappling. Thiago Santos is a master grappler. So from that, you know, okay, well, it's a bit of a thirst trap in terms of overall skills in MMA. But you can learn, okay, so-and-so's at this camp, fully dedicated themselves there. Well, I can throw that up in a graphic. We can talk about it. For Khalil Rountree, it always used to be staple of King's MMA. You saw him at King's MMA. Now it's not so. He's over in Phuket. He's really dedicated himself to Muay Thai. And you might see the Hickman brothers feature here and there. I think it's Performance Phuket is really the gym that you see him out of now. But it's such a big change. And in that Anders fight, you saw the fruits of his labor really come into fruition.
You really did. And the thing that I really liked, too, from Khalil is he just developed this speed. It wasn't like just his techniques were different. His hand speed became better. His kicks became better. And his body looked different, too. Khalil Rountree was one of the most muscle-bound fighters, really, just ever in UFC. And he's still a big guy, but you can tell that the transition to going to Thailand, I don't know if it has to do with his cardio. I just don't know if the training's different. But it seems like he's just in better MMA shape now. And I like that for his cardio, too. Marcin Prachnio, it felt like when he was coming to the UFC, he was like a knockoff Krzysztof Jotko. And at the time, he wasn't even a knockoff version of him. He had that karate style.
A Polish comparison?
No. But he has the karate style. He can set things up with his kicks. The difference was Prachnio was finishing fights before he came to the UFC, which is something Jotko was never really able to do. Jotko has that really beautiful style of striking. Just not a lot is behind his kicks. Whereas Prachnio, it felt like, wow, he's going to come over. He's got this great movement. He's got power in his hands, power in his feet. And we've seen him get knocked out 3 times in the first round. So for Khalil, listen, he dropped Tyson Pedro in the first second of their fight with the first punch he threw. He knocked out Daniel Jolly, knocks out Paul Craig. Like, Khalil Rountree is one of the more powerful guys you will see in MMA. And it's not just because he hits hard. It's the technique behind his techniques now. The Cutelaba loss, I don't think you can take much from that. Cutelaba caught a kick, takes him down, has really good ground and pound. Not something we really know Prachnio for. This is primarily going to be held on the feet. So it comes down to, do I like the striking and the durability of Prachnio, or do I like this newer version of a Khalil Rountree? And something we do have to bring up, it's unfortunate, Khalil himself doesn't have the best chin. Like, yes, Prachnio has been knocked out quite a few times as of late, but I would say it's a weakness for both guys. Not two of the more durable guys you'll ever see. This is definitely one of those, like, inside the distance bets if you are going to make one. But I like Khalil in this fight.
Khalil Rountree now, and you saw it in the fight against Cutelaba, and you talked about the kick that was caught. He threw the classic, I'm going to chop down a banana tree with this tie kick, and landed it right to Cutelaba's midsection. At the same time, Cutelaba crashed distance and went to take Rountree down. And if Rountree fights wrestlers, he's probably going to have a hard time.
Oh, yeah.
Again, you saw that in the Sanchez fight, but that's kind of been a bit of a token when you take on a guy like Khalil Rountree. Luckily for Khalil Rountree, they don't normally match him up against wrestlers.
The Olajaychuk fight was bad for him.
That was a really bad one. That's probably the worst loss out of them. And again, Walker was a highlight reel knockout. Cutelaba, well, it was more ground and pound in the elbows that he was able to land, whether it was from guard or he kind of had, top position, and it was a TKO loss in that one against Cutelaba. For Prachnio, for him to win, again, do I trust his kicks from distance? Well, I haven't really seen it. He was rocked in that Alvi fight. We laugh about it. But he walked all the way across the cage and had his hands down and get hit by a hook and get knocked out. In the fight that he had, his second time out against Ankalaev, wasn't overly competitive. And then the last time out against Mike Rodriguez this summer, again, we laughed about it in the preview, but he landed a couple of decent shots, but most of the hands that you see him throw, it's hooks from in close that really have to land with precision, and they don't. And we don't really see a lot of those kicks. So it's really tough to try and take him, too. The other thing, Khalil Rountree has that high tie guard. It's going to be hard to hit him with a kick like that. It really is.
All of Prachnio's weapons are at range. And at range, Khalil's just going to be kicking out your front leg from under you constantly. So you're not even really going to be able to push off your front leg to land anything with power. And especially if you're trying to set up kicks, it's going to be really difficult for Prachnio, especially if Khalil's dedicated to the kicking game early on in this fight. If he can keep it at range and tries to avoid some of those closer engagements. Because, listen, Marcin Prachnio is still a 205-pound man, and after he rehydrates, he's much bigger. Anyone can get knocked out, especially with two guys with suspect chins. I just really like Khalil in this. I like him defensively. I like him at range. It's hard to pick against Khalil in this fight.
Last thing we had to talk about, the odds. Rountree opened a minus 300 favorite. He's now a minus 335 for Prachnio. Open to plus 250. He's now at a plus 259 over on Tapology. 620 votes. 93% have Khalil Rountree. 87% have him to win by knockout. I will be going with Bangkok ready Khalil Rountree in this fight. Maybe Prachnio is able to kind of reverse the sands of time. I know Alessio Di Chirico, 3-fight losing streak, beat Joaquin Buckley. Anything is possible as they say. But yeah, for me, it's Rountree in this one.
Yeah, and hopefully Kevin Garnett would also pick Rountree like us.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight and this entire card. We have a great stacked main card with the two big fights at the top. Hooker taking on Michael Chandler. And our main event, the rematch between Poirier and McGregor. Let's keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it. Mike Gundy would like our next fight because we have a fighter that's coming in here at 40 years of age and Sara McMann taking on the Venezuelan vixen Julianna Pena. Both these fighters really at a crossroads, you could say, because for Sara McMann, took a lot of time off from 2018 on. The birth of her second child kind of got in the way of the MMA career. I wouldn't even say that. She really focused on her family and did the right and honorable thing.
It's almost like that's more important than fighting.
Time off, and she was on a 2-fight losing streak. Had lost to Ketlin Vieira and Marion Renault, both of those by submission. Comes back at the age of 39 against Lena Landsberg last January. And picked up a huge win. She looked absolutely amazing, looked back and on point, and it really meant a lot to her to get the win there. She's favored in this fight to get the win at 40 years of age, taking on, again, the Venezuelan vixen, Julianna Pena. 31 years of age. She's taken on a really good level of competition since she debuted in MMA. Picked up a big win in kind of her comeback fight against Nico Montano by decision back about a year and a half ago. Lost to the kickboxer by submission in her last time out against Germaine de Randamie. And really, the narrative going into that fight with Germaine de Randamie was the fact that Julianna Pena, a black belt in jiu-jitsu, that's her bread and butter, and you have to watch out for the groundwork. And in the second round of that fight, it looked like that was going to ring true. But in the third round, Germaine de Randamie decided, no. That's not going to happen, and got her stuck in a really nasty guillotine and finished her off. That was insane.
I have so many questions about both of these fighters, and they're specialists, I would say, but they both have major weaknesses in their game. Now, luckily, I would say both their weaknesses in this fight counteract each other. Neither one of them are very good at striking. I would actually give the edge to McMann. And even with McMann, it's odd. You bring up the Renault fight. The Renault fight's one of those like underrated, low-key, might be one of the top 10 best women's MMA fights ever, because Sara McMann goes out there and dominates Marion Renault. And in the second round, Marion Renault comes out, drops Sara McMann, gets on top of her and chokes her out. Like, it was just a really nice performance.
Just a couple of 40-year-old women now.
A couple of 40-year-old women. They're women. They're 40. Sara McMann, though, it's always been odd to me, and I know we'll talk about how she's rededicated herself. She's trained a lot more jiu-jitsu now, but for the length of her career, she was I'm a wrestler, and that's the only grappling I need. I'm a wrestler, and I'm a wrestler first. And that's come back to bite her quite a few times. The Ketlin Vieira fight's always a funny one.
It's tricky, too. I just want to say this, because 2004 Athens Games silver medalists, it's almost like the Marco Madsens or the Olympians that we have seen. I'm such a good wrestler. I'm so much better at wrestling than everybody else. I can just stick to it.
The difference is, though, you look at other really high-level wrestlers. Daniel Cormier, for instance. Daniel Cormier, an Olympian, also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Turns out that's a hell of a combination to have. And then you look at DC. Can take pretty much anyone down, can choke you out or ground and pound you. For Sara McMann, it's a lot of very top-heavy position fighting. And it's weird because she does have decent submissions herself. A lot of head and arm chokes. We see a lot more from wrestlers than we do from Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. But in the Vieira fight, she gets Vieira in a full-blown head and arm choke, like locked in, she's off to the side, putting it in. Vieira gets out of it and just reverses the position and ends up choking out Sara McMann with the exact same submission. It just shows you that, yes, wrestling's really good for getting the fight to the mat, but if you're really looking to progress and damage your opponent, you need the other aspect of grappling, and hopefully Sara McMann has taken that part a lot more serious, because with Julianna Pena, it's weird her losses come by submissions. He's in that like Michael Chiesa category where it's like, wow, you're good at submissions, but I've seen you get submitted. This is someone who I thought she was going to beat Valentina Shevchenko when they fought. But in hindsight, because that was a main event, that was one of the first big Fox shows, like that was a big deal, or it was a big Fox show, I should say, not one of the first. But she had some really nice wins, especially on her way up, and she'd come off the Ultimate Fighter. There was a lot of hype behind her, and she felt like, not to say an above average, because she's definitely an above average fighter, but she was one of those prospects who on her way up, there was definitely overabundance of hype behind her. And at UFC 200, she fought Kat Zingano, and even that performance is a little odd. And when we look through, so you beat Jessica Ai, you beat Kat Zingano, and Nico Montano. Like, those are her three best wins. And I feel like a lot of people are still thinking that Julianna Pena is one of the top fighters in the division, where if we're just honest with ourselves, like, she's never had a top-level win. Kat Zingano at that point was on a massive losing streak. Nico Montano, come on now. And Jessica Ai, who doesn't even fight in that weight class anymore. Like, all of her wins, when you really want to make a big deep dive into them, have these little caveats associated with them. And the fact that she was choked out by a not even a non-grappler. Like, Germaine de Randamie doesn't even entertain grappling, and she was able to not just guillotine, completely put her to sleep. I don't get it.
The weirdest part out of that fight, and I had this written down in my notes too, was the fact that she had so much control time in that second round. It did look like, Julianna Pena might win this fight. And I know that the odds had shifted so much. The live betting odds, I believe Julianna Pena was the favorite going into the third round on live odds. And I thought that was crazy because I actually had Jermaine Durandamy to win that fight. So I felt pretty good about it. But it was such a weird fight. And that's the thing. You look at the Julianna Pena career. Again, started out training Pacific Northwest, moved to Chicago. I remember that was a big deal. It was a huge talking point in the build-up to her fight against Valentina Shevchenko. Loses that fight and then takes a ton of time off. And Julianna Pena, I worry, and this is one of those things that you can now say in hindsight, Julianna Pena and Santiago Ponzinibbio, they both got more involved with commentary work. Has it affected their fights? I would counter it and say not so much. Based on that 1 second round, it really kind of put me over the edge with Julianna Pena. To have a second round like that against Durandamy, I don't think she's totally shot. And for Sara McMann, the submission wins that she has, and again, if you want to go back through it, Alexis Davis, Canadian. Well, that was a big win 4 years ago. She beats Gina Mazzani. We were in the building for that one in Halifax. Gina Mazzani cried.
She also took that fight on like a day's notice.
And it was her UFC debut. And then the win over Lena Landsberg, again, that's a big win after a long time off. But the Elbow Queen is known as the Elbow Queen because her striking's so good. It's not like her wrestling's all that great. Sara McMann, credit where credit's due. Her wrestling was on point in that fight. So I just want to point to the odds, Matt, before we go too much further.
Oh, I just got to dispel something. The commentary myth is not real. That's something Brendan Schaub started talking about like 5 years ago.
Oh, don't lump me in with that.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to right now. Like, it's not a real thing. Stop bringing that up. Because here's the thing. The more time you spend with the sport, the more you're either going to learn about it.
You would hope.
It's not even you would hope. Like, Daniel Cormier became champ as an analyst. Like, a lot of fighters go on to still do very well afterwards. Kamaru Usman does analyst work. Like, it's always a ridiculous thing. I understand why you have to bring it up because it is a conversation out there. I just think it's a ridiculous one to have in the first place.
I think the trouble really, if you look at it with Pena and if you look at it with Ponzinibbio, it's more the time away.
But the difference is, and for Pena, like, these are both women who took times away from their careers to start families. And there's nothing like it's the most honorable thing you can do, really. But it's going to affect your career at a certain point. Like, Michael Jordan took a year and a half off basketball to play baseball. And he came back and still won 3 titles, but we still saw a diminished version in the second half. Like, Julianna Pena took time off to start a family, and it's not just that she took the time off. She diverted a lot of her focus into that, and I do think that's where she's fallen off. I don't think it's the competition.
If you look at Sara McMann, too, I know it's been a little bit of maybe camp change. If you go over to the Instagrams, Precision Wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu, there's a lot of pictures of her there. Maybe not so much as the Team Alpha Male pictures, so something to throw in there. With Julianna Pena, obviously made those wholesale changes about, 3 years ago? Now 4 years ago. So we'll see how, the camps affect the fighters. If we look at the total picks on Tapology, 551 of them, 74% Pena, 83% by decision. If we have a look at the odds, Pena open a minus 140 favorite. She's now plus 102 underdog. McMann open plus 120. She's now to minus 126. Interesting to see the flip-flop in the odds there.
It is, and I'm going to throw a little bit of shade towards Tapology voters, but normally the voters have it right over the odds. Like, the people who take the time to vote on that watch more MMA.
A lot of people are going to disagree with you in the comments, but I'm in agreement with you.
But when you look at this fight, I really saw it as the opposite way. Like, I think we did lay out a pretty good case for why Sara McMann should win this fight. On the feet, Pena is not a big enough threat to convince me that she can at least win rounds on the feet. And Sara McMann's by far the better wrestler. Now, if McMann does find herself in a bad position on the ground, I trust that she'll be able to make it out of it. Whereas Pena, it's odd. When she gets into a compromising position, I'm not going to use the word quit, but there's definitely a lack of just aggression to get out of some positions with Pena. She's a little lackadaisical at some point throughout fights. I like Sara McMann in this fight. I would avoid putting money on it just because Sara McMann needs to get the fight to the ground, and Pena is a good grappler. We've seen that be a bit of a weakness for McMann, but Sara McMann should win this fight.
McMann's kind of tricky, too, when she's off her back. It's a classic wrestler trope,
like
too.
Bad.
Hopefully we don't see that in this one. Hopefully it's not the Luis Smolka effect, which was dispelled by Luis Smolka himself in his last fight. And if you want to hear more about that, watch every Luis Smolka prediction we've ever done, because we stick to it until now. But if you look at this, if Pena gets on top, then that's going to be an A-plus performance by Julianna Pena, I would expect. But with Sara McMann, it is a tricky one. I do like the, underdog in this one, or the fighter that opened as an underdog in this one. I like Sara McMann. But again, yeah, Matt, I'm in agreement with you. This is one that I wouldn't put on a card because it's too volatile. It's two fighters that are at odd points in their career. The age really favors Pena. I mean, she's still young enough at 31. But again, she's been fighting good competition since 2012, I would argue. Lost to Sarah Morris and then Deanna Bennett. And then she goes on to win the Ultimate Fighter season 18 and win 4 fights in a row, albeit 3 of them exhibitions. And for Sara McMann, she had that fight so long ago against Ronda Rousey, but she still continued to progress through her career. She's not just a wrestler at this point, or maybe not
No, she
just
is.
relying on it, but her hands have gotten better. We've seen her get better in certain aspects, and I at least know that the jiu-jitsu's kind of come a long way since she first came into MMA as well. So I'm going to go with Sara McMann. Probably not the most confident pick on this card. We're both in agreement with Sara McMann. Hopefully it doesn't bust your parlay because you'd be a donkey to throw money onto this one. But overall, really looking forward to the card. We have a great main and co-main coming up. Michael Chandler making his UFC debut, taking on Dan Hooker. And in our main event, with Conor McGregor taking on a really tough out Dustin Poirier in the rematch. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. We got a really weird fight, and a crossroads fight at that. At middleweight, we have Brad Tavares taking on Antonio Carlos Jr. Cara de Zapato, which is known more colloquially, I guess, as Shoeface. I don't know if you want to go around calling your friends Cara de Zapato. You could if you're an English speaker, and nobody's going to know what you're saying.
Oh.
Hopefully they don't have a lick of Portuguese in their back pocket. But Matt, I look at this fight as 2 guys that have taken on really good competition in their last 2 fights, and they haven't won them. And for Brad Tavares, a loss to Israel Adesanya, and then a loss to Edmund Shabazian. And you look at the Shabazian loss, and it's weird because he looked so poor against Derek Brunson, but he looked amazing against Brad Tavares. And I remember that fight, it was about a year and a bit ago. I had parlayed Shabazian with Jairzinho Rosenstrike to get a win, and I hit it big. The odds were great on those 2 guys, and I got really lucky, I guess I should say. And for Antonio Carlos Jr., a loss to Ian Heinisch and then a loss to Uriah Hall by split decision. And you might say, well, pump the brakes, Craig. High-level competition definitely sides more with Tavares than it does with Carlos Jr. Uriah Hall is a good fighter. He just beat...
Here's the thing, too. Just talk about the split decision. Uriah Hall beat the brakes off Shoeface. Like, that wasn't a very close fight. It was, what do you consider more? Me, and it's not like Shoeface was even going for submissions. It was, he went for takedowns on Uriah Hall, and Uriah Hall just beat him up on the feet. Like, it's weird that it was a split.
And then the fight that Shoeface had against Ian Heinisch, he was successful in the first round. I had him winning the first. In the second and third, he kind of tailed off. He started to get hit, and his wrestling wasn't very good. And that's a real parallel that you can kind of draw between these fights in the fact that Brad Tavares, mostly known as a wrestler, and again, an Extreme Couture guy. So what is he? He's a wrestle boxer, like everybody else.
And a great case of it, too.
At Extreme Couture. And yeah, if you really want to point to Brad Tavares' career, it's so funny. The knockouts. The guy does not knock people out, and there was such a length of time between knockout A to knockout B. So knockout A in the UFC was way back in 2011, January 1st. He beat Phil Baroni at UFC 125.
This was so long ago, they were still naming the pay-per-views. UFC 125 Resolution.
Because it was on New Year's Day. So way back then, and then he takes years off between that and his finish over Krzysztof Jotko back in 2018. And then he lost the 2 fights following. For Antonio Carlos Jr., he won the Ultimate Fighter at heavyweight, weighed in at 212 pounds to beat, maybe not the best level of competition on the Ultimate Fighter, Brazil Season 3, but still good enough. He's a very credentialed black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that's kind of been the staple of a lot of his fights. You go back and you watch it, he beats Vitor Miranda to win the title, if you will. He moves down to 205, loses to Pat Cummins, beats Eddie Gordon, so on and so forth. Has a finished loss to Dan Kelly.
I held that against him for a long time.
That's fair. And then you look at the wins. He beats Leonardo Guimarães. He beats Marvin Vettori, beats Eric Spicely by submission. Spicely normally submits guys if he's going to win. Beats Jack Marshman by submission. Beats Tim Bosch by submission. Has a bunch of bookings with Derek Brunson and Elias Theodorou that fall through. And then he lost those last 2 in a row. And the fight that I point to, again, like I said, the Ian Heinisch fight, where in the first round he's trying to get on top of Ian Heinisch. Ian Heinisch decides that he's just going to mash buttons and just keep going Granby roll. And it got him out of all those bad positions. And then in the second and third round, when Shoeface started to slow down, that's when Heinisch got top position, was really able to get on him. The last thing I want to say, Antonio Carlos Jr. has one of the longest reaches that you're ever going to see in this division at 79 inches. He always has a reach advantage. He has one in this fight against Tavares. He had a huge one against Heinisch and a good one against Hall. he never uses it to his advantage. He is one of the weirdest strikers in MMA, and we talk about it. You don't see a lot of people finding success when they hit like this, or at the end of their punch, they end up hitting with the wrist.
Gaethje's like the only one.
Shoeface is one of those guys where he'll throw his right hand out there and hit with his wrist, and sometimes it gets guys, but he just doesn't do a great job of his striking because he's such a good grappler. And then when he goes to close distance and go for takedowns, I've seen him do trips where he grabs the body first. Like, he just does weird types of takedowns. Against Brad Tavares, that's going to be an odd matchup.
I don't think it will be. Again, we're talking about the wrestling of Brad Tavares. When's the last time you saw him even shoot a takedown? Like, Brad Tavares is a good fighter, don't get me wrong. He's been in the top 15 for a while. But Brad Tavares is a perfect case of you're getting moved up in the ranks because you're fighting a prospect. And I'm not trying to throw shade at Brad Tavares, but he was like number 15 before he fought Adesanya, and he moved up like 5 spots before the booking. That doesn't make any sense. And you look at his wins, yes, he has nice ones, but the Jocko knockout win is suspect because Jocko had been knocked out 2 fights previously, and that was his 3rd knockout loss in a row. So you beat a guy, your best win is a guy who was coming off 2 knockout losses. The Theodoro fight was way too close, and I know it's hard to look good against Elias Theodoro. Everyone knows that because he's just kind of wacky, but so you have a questionable win over Elias Theodoro, you have a split over win against Malik Alish, and you beat Talis Leites. Like, it's a good run. I also don't like this other thing about Brad Tavares. He takes a lot of time off in between fights. And I know it's more of a case as of lately, but you look at the Adesanya fight. So he fights Adesanya, takes about a year off, well, a little over a year, then fights Shabazian. Now he's on another year-plus layoff, and it does worry me. It'd be different if, okay, you lose to Adesanya, no big deal. Even if he had lost to Shabazian, but at least shown a different fighter, I'd be like, okay, he's using his time off wisely. He looked worse against Shabazian. Like, some fighters look better when they do take time off. It allows them to really heal their body 100% and work more on skills, not just, okay, I'm jumping into training camp. He didn't look like that. When he fought Adesanya, he actually had some decent moments in the fight. He lasted 5 rounds with Israel Adesanya. It's not something a lot of people can say. And then against Shabazian, there was a certain hesitancy behind a lot of his strikes, and he never wants to pull the trigger. And that's the weird thing about Brad Tavares. I don't know if that's been the story throughout his career, because you look at him, and he is a decent striker. He should be able to put people away, and you look at the level of competition. Nate Marquardt in 2015 was done. Like, he wasn't having competitive fights with anyone in the middleweight division. That was the round when he had got doctor stoppage or corner stoppage against Gastelum. You should be able to finish guys like that. And the fact that Brad Tavares, who is a massive middleweight, doesn't have any power in his shots. I don't know if there is, like, he pulls his punches just unintentionally. There just seems to be something going on with Brad Tavares, and I don't know what it is.
The stats are weird, and this is one of those things with Fight Night Picks. We used to go heavy into the stats. We kind of gotten away from it, but in this fight, you brought up a really good point, and this is one that I actually wanted to touch on. The takedown average per 15 minutes. Brad Tavares is a wrestle boxer, but he only averages just over 1 takedown per fight. And he fights a lot to decision, so he's doing a lot with his hands. His strike differential is not great, albeit it is positive. But Shoeface, for what it's worth, he uses striking in weird ways. He's really heavy on his lead leg. If you're a guy that kicks a lot, you can kind of kick it out from him, and it screws him up. And then he has to go into overload mode where now I have to really work takedowns. Then he gets into distance, he gets cracked, and he loses fights. Uriah Hall. You look at this one, percentages are about the same in terms of striking. Brad Tavares lands a lot more, but he gets hit a lot more. Well, you can attribute that to fights against Yoel Romero, fights against Israel Adesanya, and so on and so forth, and him getting knocked out in his last fight. But it's just, the takedown defense is good, 77% for Tavares. His accuracy's bad. He's a wrestler that doesn't go for a lot of takedowns, and his accuracy's bad. Okay, he has good takedown defense.
Then you're not a wrestler.
So we'll have to see what happens in this one, because Shoeface is pretty darn good at his takedowns and lands about 2.7 more takedowns per fight than Brad Tavares. So,
last thing on Shoeface, if I can, just analysis-wise. Luke Thomas said something that I don't think anyone talks about, and I think it's a really important fact to bring up. There's a difference in jiu-jitsu, within big guys doing jiu-jitsu and smaller guys doing jiu-jitsu. Antonio Carlos Jr. is a big guy who does jiu-jitsu like he's a smaller guy. And I know it's a weird thing to say, but he is very aggressive. He'll go for submissions. He's not control-oriented at all. And we start talking about that a little bit more, how you have control-level grapplers and then you have more submission-based grapplers. Antonio Carlos Jr. will give up position to go for submission. Because for as long as you're on the ground with him, and the third round's a little bit different because he can get tired. But as long as he has any sort of fumes in the tank, he's a threat on the ground. I can't stress enough just how much of a jiu-jitsu advantage Antonio Carlos Jr. has over Brad Tavares.
And it's one of those things, I remember seeing it in the Heinisch fight, but I've seen it in other Shoeface fights where he's on the side of a fighter, and instead of trying to force his way up to really use a lot of energy to get onto the back, he'll kind of slink down underneath and try and work off of his back. He's a great jiu-jitsu practitioner, like you said. You can't emphasize that one enough. So, if we have a look at the Tapology votes before we look at the odds, 643 total votes, 62% Tavares, 84% have him to win by decision. Brad Tavares open to minus 120 favorite. He's now minus 153. Shoeface open to plus 100. He's now a plus 126. We've made it a pretty one-sided prediction, I'd say, which we don't often do. For Brad Tavares to get a win, he has to be efficient with his striking, and he has to want to strike. He has to really let his hands go. Because if you can almost work from a range, if you can work and move and circle away from Shoeface, if you can kick that lead leg, we know how good Brad Tavares' takedown defense can be. That's all I have for Brad Tavares. Now, the guys at Extreme Couture know way more about MMA than I do, and that was an oversimplification from a guy on the internet, and it'll probably never make it to him, unless he's like Sasha Platnikov and watches every prediction video.
That's true.
But I have a hard time picking Brad Tavares to win this fight because of the layoffs and the fact that he was the hot thing on the block when he beat, when he beat Phil Baroni 9 years ago.
He was never the hot thing off the block.
That was 10 years ago. And the level of competition's there. You beat Lorenz Larkin. That's a big win. You lose to Romero. You lose to Boach. You beat Marcourt. You lose to Whitaker. Hey, that was almost, 6 years ago. And then the wins after that, Talis Leites later on in his career. Theodorou, that again, he's always doing something. He's busy. Jocko's good. And then the last two bookings are good competition. It's tough for me to pick Brad Tavares in this fight.
I like Brad Tavares against the type of fighters who he's beaten. Let's just go through just those 4 fights. Count Magalhaes isn't a threat to finish you. Neither is Elias Theodorou. Neither was Leites at that stage of his career. And same thing with Jocko. A lot of point-based fighters.
Magalhaes, going into that fight, was 9-2. His record now is 10-7.
And they were way too high up on the card. It was weird. But anyways, those are a lot of people who can't make Brad Tavares pay for his mistakes. And when we bring up the positives of Brad Tavares, it's a lot of defensive attributes. We're not saying that Brad Tavares can go out there. We talk about the leg kick. It's a weakness for Junior, but I don't know if it's a weakness that Brad Tavares can really take advantage of. Against Talis Leites, it was weird because Jack Hermanson actually kind of showed that you could really leg kick him a lot. Brad Tavares didn't do it at all. Like, Brad Tavares has had opportunities in his fights where you look at him and you're like, wow, like, he could really become the next big thing. Then you look at his age and you realize just how many fights he has had in the UFC. Just an odd combination, and I don't know. Brad Tavares can still beat good guys in the UFC. I just don't think he's going to be able to go out there and beat Antonio Carlos Jr. And not that Carlos Jr. is making a run towards the title by any means. I just like Antonio Carlos Jr. at this stage in his career. I think he only needs one takedown. I think on the feet, Tavares is going to have an advantage, but Jr. can frustrate you to the point where you might be the better striker, but he's just doing enough to make it even on the feet. And on the ground, I don't even think this fight's close.
So going into this one, again, might not be one that I throw into my card, but fight goes to the distance is minus 150. Maybe you have a look at that one, or maybe you're high on Carlos Jr. getting the sub. But overall, both of us going with Cara de Zapato, Shoeface, Antonio Carlos Jr. to get the win. Another underdog. We're high on the underdogs this week. Overall, really looking forward to this fight as far as the middleweight division is concerned. And it is a great card with Poirier McGregor 2 at the top. And under that, a really interesting fight between Dan Hooker and the former Bellator king at one point, Michael Chandler, making his UFC debut. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really excited about our next fight at lightweight. We considered this one at the start of the overall full card prediction video as a possible fight of the night between Armenia's Arman Tsarukyan, and I will not even attempt to pronounce his nickname, taking on Nasrat Haqparast, representing Afghanistan and Germany. Two really good prospects in this lightweight division. Two very contrasting styles. For Nasrat Haqparast, great boxing, really nice kicks, really able to close distance well. He did get caught and maybe a little overconfident in the fight that he had against Drew Dober with those talents, but the wins that he was able to get off of the loss to Marcin held in his UFC debut, we're talking the JKC decision win, a win over Thibaut Goody where I believe he was a minus 900 or 915 favorite, UFC Moncton, in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. Fight Night Picks was there for that one. And then the knockout win over Joaquim Silva. Huge wins, huge dose of momentum in his favor. And then Drew Dober took it all away. And for Nasrat Haqparast, well, what do? You pick up the pieces, and he took a fight about 6 months later against Alex Munoz. And listen, you might say Alex Munoz, is he a body double for Michael Chandler? I'm putting it up on screen. They fight the same. They look like they could be twin brothers. Somebody might want to do a paternity test on those two guys. But in that fight, the story was Alex Munoz, he's Team Alpha Male's wrestling coach, and that's all he's going to do. And the first thing that he did in that fight was shoot a power double all the way across the cage, and he got it. He wrapped his hands and had Haqparast down. Haqparast had to work his way back up to his feet, and then after that, Munoz went 0-7 on takedowns. And that's been the story for Nasrat Haqparast's career. You get taken down 3 times against Marcin held, which you do not want to do because that guy will take your leg home. And then after that, didn't get taken down until the Munoz fight. And that's one of the better stats. If you're going to look stats-wise, it's the fact that Nasrat Haqparast has had really good takedown defense, up past 80% so far in his young UFC career. And I think it still is young to this point. But for Arman Tsarukyan, like we said, in the overall breakdown, as this being a fight of the night, this guy came in on short notice at 22 years of age with 3 wins over UFC vets and had a very competitive fight of the night against Islam Makhachev. And again, I get it. 2 of the judges scored at 30-27 Makhachev. One of the judges had the stones to give Arman Tsarukyan the second round in that one. It was very, very competitive. And then from that, Tsarukyan parlayed it into really big wins over Olivier Aubert-Mercier that fights a kind of grinding type of style, if he will win. Tsarukyan got the better of him. And then they gave him an uber black belt and a guy with heavy hands in Davi Hamosh. Hamosh looked totally outclassed. Like, he looked like a fish out of water in that fight. He tried to do his classic, heavy-handedness to close distance, and he chased Tsarukyan the whole fight. So maybe Haqparast is going to have that issue in this one. I think this is a great fight, though. Kind of crazy that they match 2 prospects like this up, but I love this fight.
So way back in the day, this was a beautiful time in the early UFC Fox relationship, I guess. Brandon Thatch was supposed to fight Wonderboy Thompson, and it was like, wow, these are the 2 hottest prospects in the UFC, and they're going to match up together. And then Wonderboy gets hurt, so they put Benson Henderson in, and Brandon Thatch, there's a reason probably a lot of you guys don't know who Brandon Thatch is. This is a weird fight because it's 2 high-level prospects. And yes, Haqparast has that bad loss to Drew Dober. And you did bring up overconfidence a bit. Listen, Drew Dober's just better than Nasrat Haqparast at this stage of his career. I don't think it was a fault of Haqparast. It's just he went in there against a guy who right now is ranked, 11 or 12th in the division?
And the big thing off of that loss, too, and this is one of the things they pointed out on the commentary team before the Munoz fight, the fact that Nasrat Haqparast relocated himself and he was training with the Zaitsar brothers, and we're going to see Ottman at the top of the card or close to the top of the card, and Marco Madsen to work the wrestling. And you really saw it again. Disappointing that double leg hit the first takedown attempt Munoz got. But then after that, it was like, oh, okay, I'm all right now.
The issue is if Alex Munoz can take you down 1 time, Arman Tsarukyan can take you down 13. And it's not that it's just such a high number and that's why he's going to win. Tsarukyan's great at chaining his takedowns together. And we brought it up in one of the earlier predictions about Evloev. Tsarukyan can just chain and chain and chain and chain until the cows go home and he will not get tired. Like, his grappling cardio, and this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. There's different kinds of cardio. If you force a striker to grapple a lot, they're going to get tired a lot quicker. Tsarukyan, he's just so in tune with what his game plan should be. I have decent hands. Like, he's a good striker, but he knows where his bread gets buttered, and that's on the ground. He's got great top control, great submissions, and great ground and pound. For Haqparast against Munoz, yes, he was able to win that fight, but Munoz leading up to that fight, his best win was Nick Newell. It's really hard to compare the skill set of a Nick Newell to an Arman Tsarukyan. And for Haqparast, too, he's in this weird stage of his career because it seems like he can beat guys who choose to play his game with him. He's a phenomenal boxer. And go back and watch the Thibaut Gouti fight. Correct? They're live. He beats the absolute brakes off Gouti, but as he does start to tire near the end of that fight, Gouti is right on him, and he is able to, he doesn't secure any takedowns, but he does. He makes it an ugly fight, and it starts to get to Haqparast. If you stay at range with Haqparast and just make it a technique for technique kind of fight, you're going to be in for a long night. But if you can make it an ugly fight, and I know that's an overused term in MMA, but it holds a lot of weight with Nasrat Haqparast, you can almost get him off of his game if you make it really ugly. Munoz is able to do that, and I don't think we saw the best Nasrat Haqparast throughout the rest of that fight. I think Haqparast at his best can probably finish Alex Munoz. With Tsarukyan, if he's able to get that initial takedown, and even on the feet, I don't think Tsarukyan is going to be lost against Haqparast. And I think his fight IQ is high enough, even at the young age of 24, that if he is starting to get hit on the feet, he will switch things up. He won't do what we saw poor Punahele Soriano got the big win over Dusko Todorovic, and Dusko just kept on leaning back. Again, shout out to Fat Joe. Kept on hitting him with the lean back. If Tsarukyan's starting to get hit, he will make the adjustments and not be susceptible to the same technique over and over and over again. Whereas with Haqparast, if he's not doing well in a fight or if there's something he struggles with, he doesn't always make the in-fight adjustments. And again, it's easy to say he's had a pretty successful career. There's only been that one big loss to Drew Dober, but even go all the way back to the Marcin held fight. And yes, his skill set's improved quite a bit since then. But it was a weird lack of fight IQ from Haqparast in that fight. On the feet, he would hurt Held every single time they had an exchange. He'd either put him down or rock him bad, but then he'd almost be like too aggressive and end up getting taken down. If he's able to hurt Tsarukyan and he does try to rush in for the kill, that might be the worst thing for him, because then you're making Tsarukyan's job easier. You're going to close the distance for him, make it so really he doesn't have to waste the energy doing it himself. And with Tsarukyan, last thing, he can do takedowns against the cage or in the middle of the mat. And it's something that not everyone can do that. Like Khabib himself really only goes for takedowns up against the cage. I like that Tsarukyan can mix it in inside or against the cage, but also in the open mat as well.
Matt, I don't think they'd accept you on Yellowstone because early on you were telling the cows to go home, not to come home.
My
so
bad.
You would be in a lot of trouble over there, Kevin Costner.
People gotta stop telling me about that show.
Yikes. But overall, I look at this fight and you're right. The weirdest thing, that strike differential for Nasrat Haqparast, and again, not the biggest into MMA stats. You got to take them with a huge grain of salt, especially where you have it weighted so much in that Goody fight. It's such a big differential. You don't often see that in MMA. You have great percentages from both of these guys. The striking defense, amazing from Nasrat Haqparast. And that long southpaw stance. He keeps that lead hand out there. He pumps a really nice jab. And again, training with the Zaitsar brothers and Marco Madsen really going to set you up well for a lot of fights you're going to have. The only thing I would say about that Munoz fight is that they kind of gave him a layup. Again, Munoz was 6-0 going into that one. But what's the only issue that Munoz is going to pose you? Well, it's his wrestling. And after that initial takedown where it was all the way across the cage, but when he landed it and when Haqparast's butt hit the mat, he was right up against the cage and he could push himself right back up. Whereas with Arman Tsarukyan, it's going to be chain wrestling. It's going to be a lot of scrambles. And Arman Tsarukyan has a speed advantage over a lot of lightweights. And you kind of saw that in the loss that he had against Makmud. He has so much speed in there that he's able to really kind of react. There's a lot of proactive things that you see in his fights. There's a lot of reactive things that you see, but when he is reactive, he's at least defensively sound, that he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. So you look at the fight again that he had against Davi Ramos, and it was amazing. It was a masterclass in that this guy is an uber prospect that you have to really watch out for. So if we look at the overall Tapology votes, Matt, 643 of them, 76% have Tsarukyan, 88% have him to win by decision. If we bring out the handy-dandy odds in this one, Arman Tsarukyan open to -300. He's now -244 favorite. Nasrat Haqparast open to +250. He's now a +197. And again, it is an interesting fight because if it takes place on the feet, and if Nasrat Haqparast can really get moving early, I think he has a good opportunity to get a win in this one. It's just the fact that we've talked about this. If Arman Tsarukyan can go in there and disrupt the flow and disrupt the game plan, there's a great opportunity for Tsarukyan to get a win. So again, we talk about this fight, and you can draw parallels between this fight and even the co-main event. Dan Hooker's great on the feet. Where does he struggle? A little bit with his wrestling. Michael Chandler can really win it with the wrestling. Arman Tsarukyan, Nasrat Haqparast, very good prospects in this division. What do you expect in this fight?
Never compare these two guys to the co-main event. I understand a little bit, but Haqparast does not throw kicks at all. He is only boxing oriented, and for you to be a boxer against a guy who's only going out there to wrestle you, and again, there's oversimplification of what Tsarukyan can bring to the table, but Haqparast is going to have to get close to him to land any damaging strikes in the first place, and Haqparast has phenomenal hand speed. He does have good power in his hands. But it's really hard for me to predict, because right now in my mind it comes down to this. Can Arman Tsarukyan beat Nasrat Haqparast? Yes. Can Nasrat Haqparast knock out Arman Tsarukyan? I'm sure he could, but it's a lot easier to say that Tsarukyan can either go out there and just really confuse Nasrat Haqparast with his grappling. I think that's the key for Tsarukyan in this fight. I'm going to take Arman.
That's the thing, and I threw it up there for a layup, and you just swatted that out there like 2012 Bismack Biombo. I look at this one as
great.
Nasrat Haqparast, again, he's long from the southpaw stance. He can extend some of those punches. You saw Drew Dober catch him. I don't see that out of Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan's not going to catch him with a hook and knock him out or knock him down like that. Arman Tsarukyan's got to disrupt the flow, really start chopping down that lead leg, because Haqparast can kind of stand a little heavy on it, And you don't really see a lot of guys catching him. Maybe that's one opportunity there. But again, for Tsarukyan, just being elusive with your movement. And if you can frustrate Nasrat Haqparast, then you can really set yourself up well. I like Tsarukyan in this fight, but again, with the odds the way that they are, I'm probably not going to throw this one down on my card. I might look at this one as a possibility after the first round and into the second one.
I'll hear that one more time.
But for me, I'm not going to throw this one down on my card. But I am going with Arman Tsarukyan to get the win here.
I like Tsarukyan. I'm sure I'll probably throw him into a parlay. I like his overall wrestling game. The fact that you can have a fight of the night with one of the best fighters in your division by doing the thing he does well. That's the craziest thing. Like, go back and watch that fight. He grapples with Islam Makhachev for 15 minutes and actually holds his own for the majority of it. Like, he does quite well, even though it was a loss, against a guy who, again, was just a minus 500 against RDA. I don't think that can be taken lightly. I love Tsarukyan in this fight. I really do.
Matt, we both love Disco against Punahele Soriano. We got to pump the brakes a little bit. But overall, I'm in agreement with you. Arman Tsarukyan should be able to get the win in this fight. And if he doesn't and Nasrat Haqparast gets a win, this is going to be ultimate fireworks. Really looking forward to this one. We have two big lightweight fights in our main and co-main event. Chandler taking on Hooker, and you've got Poirier, McGregor, the rematch. So as we always say with Fight Night Picks, Matt, let's get into it. Really looking forward to this featured strawweight bout. We have two very hot prospects in Marina Rodriguez taking on Amanda Ribas. And Matt, I don't know if you have the same level of dedication that Amanda Ribas' dad does, but did you see that tattoo out there?
It's aggressive.
It's not a great tattoo. And I know Luke Thomas took a long time to talk about it, but Amanda Ribas' dad is all in on this run that his daughter has, getting the tattoo of the finish over Emily Whitmire. That was her UFC debut. Since then, Ribas has wins over Mackenzie Dern, Randa Marcos, and Paige Van Zandt, submitting Paige Van Zandt and saying, "Goodbye, Paige. Enjoy Knuckle Mania with BKFC." And for Ribas, that last fight, you can see it up on the screen. I have her last weight as 126. It was at flyweight, moving back down to strawweight. We haven't seen issues for her, kind of mixing it in between 25 and 15. For Marina Rodriguez, it's been a weird run so far in the UFC. If you go back in the last 5 fights, a draw against Randa Marcos, 2 wins over Jessica Aguilar, old Jag, pioneer in women's MMA, and a win over Tisha Torres. Draw against Cynthia Calvillo, and then a loss to Carla Esparza by split decision. What Marina Rodriguez is really good at is being a great Muay Thai fighter. She fights really, really long for this division. She's only 5'6", 65 inches of reach. They're going to be pretty well neck and neck in terms of reach. The height advantage, obviously, to Rodriguez. But when she gets into a clinch position, the knees, the elbows, you really have to watch out for them. And she's very busy when she's on the ground. You saw that in her fight against Carla Esparza when she was in bottom position. Esparza, after that first round, one of her eyes was blown right up, obviously bleeding and swelling. And Rodriguez really able to be busy in that fight. So that's what makes this one really interesting. Ribas, black belt in jiu-jitsu, black belt in judo. Maybe if she goes for some head and arm throws, you worry about it a little bit based on how good the Thai clinch is of Rodriguez rather. This is a great fight, though, because both of these women, both very good strikers and both very adept on the ground. I'm looking forward to it.
So am I, and I really like everything that we've heard from Ribas' camp coming into this fight. She doesn't just want to be another fighter on a McGregor card. I really like the fact that she realizes this is a huge opportunity that she's going to get that not many other UFC fighters ever get it. She's going to be the show opener, if you will, for the pay-per-view portion of the card. It is a huge matchup, too, because Marina Rodriguez, she fights in, it's not the perfect comp, but hear me out. She fights a little bit like Germaine Durandamy. It's not that she has the technique that Durandamy does, just a very classic Muay Thai style in which the way that they fight. For Rodriguez, it's odd because off her back, she does have decent ground and pound, kind of like Tony Ferguson, where she is looking for the elbows off her back. Stop doing that, though. There's nothing I hate worse than when people who don't have great jiu-jitsu look to be offensive off of their back. Use that energy to get back up to your feet, because for Rodriguez, if she goes out there and strikes with pretty much anyone in this division in a pure kickboxing fight, if her name's not Wei Li or Joanna, she has a very good chance of beating them. And against Ribas, Ribas on the ground is not the person you want to be messing around with, going for strikes off of your back, because you're not going to win a round by just, light hammer fists and elbows off your back. And Ribas is going to be going for submissions constantly. I really like what Ribas did against Paige Van Zandt. And I understand Ribas is in a little bit of that, we just talked about it, so it's fresh in my mind, that Brad Tavares category, where you look at her record, it's not overly impressive, the people who she's beat. Let's just be honest. It's the way that she's been able to beat them, though, which has been impressive. And her biggest win by far is that Mackenzie Dern win. But I'm going to be honest, this is a bit of a hot take. She didn't fight the best version of Mackenzie Dern. She didn't even fight that version of Mackenzie Dern. You have to go back, and it is hard to remember it in the time, but that was Dern's first fight coming off of her pregnancy, and she came back way too fast. Like, she had just had her daughter, and then came back 2 months later, and normally a training camp is 2 months. So I do think that was a little too much too soon for her, and I do think there's been a little too much hype behind Ribas because that was such a big win. Because you look at her other 2 wins, okay, so beat Paige Van Zandt. It's good, but it's not really blowing the doors off me. And then the Randa Marcos win. Listen, we like Randa.
Oh, yeah. Big Randa guy. I mean, we're Canadians, right?
It's about the extent of that. Like, you can go out there and you beat Randa Marcos. So beating Marcos shows me, okay, you can beat a primary wrestler. That's good. Beating Paige Van Zandt doesn't tell me all that much, if I'm being completely honest.
Up a weight class, too.
Exactly. There was a lot of extenuating circumstances around that fight, so I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that either. Rodriguez has definitely fought the better level of competition, and her record shows it. Now, I'm glad MMA has more of this mindset than boxing does. In boxing, it's if you lose, you're bad. In MMA, cue up John Kavanaugh, you win or you learn. And for Marina Rodriguez, she's fought the highest level of competition, and she's been able to hold her own against that. And in some cases, I do think that means more than just beating a bunch of people who you are supposed to beat in the first place.
I threw this down in my notes before we came on here. You look at Marina Rodriguez, and this is typically a thing with, fighters that have a lot of experience on the regional scene. And we see it sometimes. You get a fighter that comes out of Brazil, and whether it's the Jungle Fights Network, whatever it is, yikes, a little bit of salt, but it happens everywhere. It happens in the States too. It happens all over the place. So Marina Rodriguez, great Brazilian regional scene, career. Then she comes on to Dana White's Contender Series, the Brazilian season, and picks up a big first-round win. And then it's like, okay, you really have to pay attention to Marina Rodriguez. Kind of like Tyler Santos. Had a lot of wins in the Brazilian regional scene, gets a big win. And then her UFC debut didn't go all that well. So for Marina Rodriguez, it was, okay, she really proved it to me there. Then let's really just throw her to the wolves in the UFC. And she's taken on really good fighters. Again, you might look at the draw against Randa Marcos. You want to play MMA math with these two ladies. One has a win, one has a draw. It is what it is. Then she fights Jessica Aguilar. Pioneer of women's MMA, but Jag will give you a fight.
She destroyed her, though.
She destroyed her. Chap lip Jag, big win. Then she fights Tisha Torres. That's her best win. And that's a really good win. She outstruck Torres, landed 40 more total strikes, and looked amazing in that fight. Then she has the draw against Cynthia Calvillo. Again, a wrestler. It's going to happen in that fight. And then she loses against Carla Esparza in a split decision. I went back and watched that. Again, it's a little tricky. I had Esparza winning it.
I honestly think Rodriguez has lost her last 2 fights. I thought Calvillo beat her as well. I did think she beat Marcos, and it's really the case with a lot of Rodriguez's fights. She's either beating them up on the feet or she's being controlled off of her back, and it comes down to what do the judges value more that specific night.
That's it. So, again, you've got Amanda Ribas, the world's behind her. Her dad got a tattoo of her finishing Emily Whitfire, the old Spitfire. And she has that jiu-jitsu and that judo background. So if we have a look at the votes on Tapology, Matt, 650 of them out there, 92% going with Ribas, 50% by decision, 42% have her to win by submission. If we have a look at the odds, Rodriguez opened a plus 230 underdog. She's now a plus 248. Ribas opened a minus 270. She's now a minus 319 favorite. That's crazy.
Yeah, again, I'm pretty high on Ribas. I think she's going to win this fight. If there was 100 mats, though, 92 of them would not pick her to win. Rodriguez is a real threat in this division. She has legit power. I would say one of the more powerful women in the division. She has really nice Muay Thai on the feet. I think the clinch game of her might have been hyped up a little bit too much. Again, if it's in the clinch, I favor Ribas tremendously because the closer these two are, the more likelihood of a grappling exchange is going to happen. And Ribas on the ground compared to Rodriguez, it's not even close. Like on the feet, Ribas should be able to hold her own. I don't expect her to win a bunch of long drawn out combinations or exchanges against Rodriguez, but I do think she'll be able to hold her own and keep her distance. On the ground, I don't think this fight's close. I think that the fact that Rodriguez can be held down and controlled is really going to play into Amanda Ribas' favor, and I'll even say Ribas by sub in this one.
The weird thing in this fight, again, for Marina Rodriguez, 61% takedown defense. That's not great. She got taken down by Esparza 5 times. She got taken down by Calvillo 3 times. She held her own against Torres and against Aguilar. She got taken down by Marcos. It's not something that I love. Again, it's not terrible. It isn't,
good, honestly,
by all means. But again, she's been taken down her last 2 fights, and they haven't gone her way. If she's really going to get going, you got to set up things with the hands really quickly. That's definitely her bread and butter. But again, overall, Amanda Ribas, the great jiu-jitsu background, the great judo background, the fact that she can close distance against a lot of her opponents, not take a ton of damage. I really do favor Amanda Haqparast in this fight. So I will go with the crowd on Tapology and the gamblers out there, and I'm gonna go with Amanda Haqparast.
I really hope that Ribas doesn't win this fight and they match her up with Joanna next, or just do something stupid like that. Like, that feels like something the UFC would do. They're like, oh wow, you've got your first top 15 win. You want to get like a title eliminator, because Ribas is one of the more hyped prospects in this division. I really don't want them to rush her development though, because we do see massive improvements in between every single one of her performances, and I hope she doesn't get one of those, wow, here's a massive jump up, let's see how you can do, because it probably won't turn out that well. So if she gets this win, keep on developing her at about the rate that they have, and I think Amanda Haqparast is going to go on and have a very successful career.
I am really looking forward to this fight. We both have Amanda Haqparast to get the win, and overall, Matt, a great main card, one definitely worth checking out. In our co-main event, Hooker taking on the Bellator guy, Michael Chandler, and our main event, the rematch, a weight class up between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. So make sure you keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really looking forward to another high-level lightweight fight, and that's kind of the story of the main card of UFC 257. The fact that we have two great fighters, one in Morocco's Ottman Azaitar, the nickname's the Bulldozer, taking on Matt, the Steamroller Frevola, out of the great old US of A. And Matt, for Matt Frevola, if he's going to set things up, really has to go with a wrestling-heavy offense. You look at his last two wins against primary strikers, Jalen Turner, and a really tough out in Luis Pena. And while they consider that one a split decision win, I don't know what one of the judges was thinking, because for Matt Frevola, he put on a great fight in that one. And if you look at Ottman Azaitar,
He got dropped in every round.
He got dropped, but his wrestling worked. And if you look at Ottman Azaitar, undefeated at 13-0, his two UFC fights, a knockout of Teemu Packalén and Kama Worthy. And Matt, I remember our narrative going into the fight between Azaitar and Kama Worthy, the fact that Worthy throws a lot of straight shots down the middle. They could disrupt the rhythm of Ottman Azaitar, who throws with a lot of power. And he has a lot of different kind of styles to his fighting. And he's a master of sport in Thai boxing. He has great power. Obviously, we've seen that through his undefeated run. And Teemu Packalén, a win over him doesn't tell you anything. Teemu Packalén's UFC run was meager, I guess.
People know him for being on two different guys' highlight reels. That'd be Azaitar and Jacasey. So not really what you want to be known for in a UFC run.
It's difficult. But in this fight, very interesting. Contrasting styles meeting in the middle. For Matt Frevola coming in, he had a great win on Contender Series. He had the loss to Polo Reyes in his debut. And if you look at the overall Tapology predictions, 643 of them, 90% going Azaitar, 85% have him to win by knockout. We've seen that done. And in the Polo Reyes fight against Matt Frevola, he knocks him down with almost the first punch. And then Matt Frevola is just trying to clear the cobwebs for the rest of it, and then Polo ends it.
So Matt Frevola is a really interesting character, and you know a lot more about heavy machinery than I do. I don't really know what would win out between a bulldozer and a steam roll-up, but I
take a bulldozer, depending on the size.
Okay, perfect. So for Matt Frevola, though, he does really like to incorporate his wrestling into his game, and the wrestling is the foundation, and a lot of the time when you talk about a wrestle boxer, they use their hands to then set up their wrestling, whereas for Vola, it feels like it's the opposite. He really needs the takedown for his stand-up to have success, because on the feet, he's very basic, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He just doesn't do a lot of crazy techniques. It's just jabs and straights, not even really a lot of kicking game either. Just, I know what I'm good at, and I'm going to stick to that. Over at Ottman Azaitar, though, I don't think I've ever been more impressed. I can't say that. That's such a huge statement. I've definitely been more impressed in my life, but Azaitar's just run in the UFC to this point has been very impressive. And
two fights,
I know, but you can't have two
Teemu
fights
Packalén
and look any better. And yes, we talk about people's opponents. It matters how you beat them, though. And the fact that he was able to go out there and just start with one punch was very impressive. The Kama Worthy fight is interesting because I was never that high on Kama Worthy until the Ottman Azaitar fight. And I was like, damn, Kama Worthy at 155, he's durable, he's got good boxing, switch stances, like, wow, what isn't there to like about him? And then Ottman Azaitar, I don't know if his one goal that day was to prove me wrong, but boy did he. His boxing is absurd, and it's not just the boxing technique, it's not just the Muay Thai. His hand speed is something that cannot be undermined. He's got phenomenal strikes. He goes to the body, too. And it's something that we saw a lot in the Holloway.
If you watch that finish in the Kama Worthy fight, he rocks him, and then when Worthy goes back, he goes almost like Max Holloway in the fight against Calvin Kattar, just straight up to the body until Worthy kind of drops down, and then he starts going to the head again.
It's very Ilia Topuria-esque when you look back at just sort of recent finishes in that aspect. He's not a guy... We don't see it a lot in MMA. Left hooks to the body are really good. Stipe Miocic proved that against Daniel Cormier. And the people who use them, like the really high-level boxing in MMA, they always have great success. Zhaitar is one of those guys who, he might not have a number next to his name, but some of the skills that he shows kind of prove that he will be at that point. At one point in his career, I can almost guarantee you Ottman Zhaitar will be ranked. That's the high regard I hold him in. I like how active his hips are too. We talk about that a lot when we talk about Petr Yan. But with Yan, he might not be the best grappler in the world just when you look at it credentials-wise. But in MMA, the fact that the second you even think about a takedown on Yan, his hips are either down or they're away. He's not going to play around with that range a lot with you. Frevola, basically, like, that's all he wants to do. So for a Zhaitar, if he can keep his back off the cage and just really force this fight, I'm not even going to say disengage in the wrestling completely. It's definitely not the best idea, but if he is involved in some wrestling transitions, I wouldn't worry that much about it. I would just really need to make sure that a Zhaitar can hold the center of the cage. If he's not getting backed up to the cage where Frevola can... And Frevola won't even be getting a lot of takedowns from the cage. It's sort of the frustrating thing about his style. It's, I'm going to take you down, then you're going to work your way back up to your feet, then I'll trip you again, and it's just sort of... It's a style that's going to break your will more than any of your bones. And for a Zhaitar, the exact opposite. Like, he's going out there to finish you, where for Frevola, he's going out there to win.
It's kind of crazy when you look at these guys in terms of like Ottman and Zhaitar so far in the UFC. In terms of total strikes, it's been 43 that he's given to 9 that he's accepted. And they're all significant strikes. So it's kind of crazy to look at it that way. In 2 fights, both first round finishes. For Matt Frevola, again, the draw against Lando Fanata, it was a back and forth fight. It was really enjoyable. Gets dropped. He get dropped a few times against Polo Reyes. The fight against Jalen Turner was his fight for sure. And he gets dropped in the fight against Luis Pena. He gets dropped a lot. I know, you look at it on the Instagrams, trains at Gracie Tampa South. I've seen a fair bit at, it's Longo Weidman. You always think of it in your head as Sarah Longo. Longo Weidman MMA. I've seen him there with Ray Longo around Christmas time. I think Longo had a Christmas Santa hat on.
Good for him.
Ray Longo is just a great guy. Just hanging out with Harry Connick Jr. on that Kevin Can Wait show.
He likes the lasagna.
Harry Connick Jr. likes lasagna. But as far as this fight's concerned, Frevola is going to go for that wrestling-heavy offense. Just how good is Ottman and Zhaitar at wrestling? Well, he has 100% takedown defense through 2 fights, but it doesn't matter. Like, he has good hips. You mentioned that, too. The one other thing that I like out of Ottman and Zhaitar, you talk about a guy with fast hips, is that you can really feint a lot if you have fast hips. It all depends on where your opponent's eyes are going. I can really, as a great house league hockey player I was, it always depends in hockey where your eyes are. When you're playing hockey and a lot of different sports, where are your eyes looking? I did play
sports growing up, Craig.
I know. But are they looking at the chest? Or are they looking at the head? Or are they looking at the feet? Well, in hockey, you always want to keep them, based on your chest and where your movement's going to be. Just where are your opponents looking? Because in MMA, it's totally different. You have to watch for the kicks, the hands, the takedowns. Just where your opponent's looking. With a guy with quick hips and quick reflexes, it's always interesting. So you always have to kind of keep that in the back of your mind with a guy like Ottman Zhaitar, who has very fast hips and fast twitch muscles. I love this fight. If we look at the Topology votes again, I said 643 of them, 90% of Zhaitar, 85% by knockout. It's crazy to look at Topology votes like that when the odds are what they are. A Zhaitar open a -115, he's now a -160 favorite. For Frevola, open a -105 underdog. He's now a +133. The money just continues to shift in for Ottman and Zhaitar. I like him in this fight. Again, if his wrestling is just absolutely piss poor, maybe he does lose this fight. We talked about this in the Nasrat Haqparast video. The fact that these guys have trained together at SB Space Gym, not SBG, SB Gym, with Marco Madsen, the Zhaitar brothers, and Nasrat Haqparast. So that's a good camp to have, especially a guy like Marco Madsen, the Olympian, being kind of in your corner, at least kind of with you. I like Ottman and Zhaitar for a lot of reasons. If Matt Frevola steamrolls him, cool beans, bro. But I like a Zhaitar in this one.
So for Matt Frevola, if he's able to get that first takedown, then maybe he can just keep on building upon that. Maybe Zhaitar just does not have an answer for the wrestling of Frevola. I don't see it that way, though. And on the feet, I can't stress this enough. Like, Matt Frevola has been dropped 4 times in his last 4 fights. He did really well against Jalen Turner, to be fair. Ottman Zaitar has ungodly power. Like, it's not the guy you want to be testing your chin against. And Luis Pena is a very good striker. He's a dynamic striker, but I wouldn't really say he's a heavy-handed striker. Whereas Zaitar, he's got the diversity in strikes, but he's also got the power to go along with it. So I really like Ottman Zaitar in this fight.
Both of us going with Morocco's Ottman Zaitar to get the win overall. A great card. And listen, we talked about the lightweight fights on this card. 2 big ones in your main and your co-main. You have Michael Chandler making his UFC debut against Dan Hooker. You also have Conor McGregor taking on Dustin Poirier in the rematch at 155 pounds. I can't stress enough how good that fight's going to be. So make sure you keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Big time fight at women's flyweight. We have Joanne Calderwood coming up against Evil Eye, Jessica Eye. And Matt, while Jessica Eye might not be a fan favorite, I will say this. At 135 and 125, she's been there against some of the best women in the world. Unfortunate for her, the way that her title bid went at 125 pounds against Valentina Shevchenko. But she lost that fight. She beats Viviane Araújo. She loses her last one to Cynthia Calvillo in a main event where Calvillo looked great. Calvillo looked really good. That was Calvillo's night, and her wrestling really did a lot and caused a lot of problems for Jessica and really kind of stifled her on the feet too, because we saw Calvillo have a lot of success in that
Put
one.
a couple zeros in my bank account that night too.
For Joanne Calderwood, if you look at her last 5, it's weird. She beats Kalindra Faria 2.5 years ago by submission. You're not hearing a lot about Kalindra anymore.
I was a low-key fan back in the day. I can't lie.
She beats Ariane Lipski. She had that great win over Luana Carolina, but that's been about it for her in the UFC. She got a big contract after that one, too. Weird. She loses to Caitlin Chookagian. She beats Andrea Lee by split decision, and then she was in a title eliminator where she probably should have waited a little bit, but didn't. Took on Jennifer Maia. I remember the prediction video as clear as mud when we went to kind of break that one down, and I want to say we both had Calderwood to win that one.
Oh, we did. Quite confidently as well.
Quite confidently in the stand-up. Well, Jennifer Maia beat her bad and made her look kind of slow. And I talked about clear as mud. It almost looked like Joanne Calderwood kind of missed a step in that fight, and it was just a weird one for her there. Again, both of these women are not young in their career, and that's the weird thing, because if you look it up, and I put the graphic up there, they didn't start fighting until the 2010s. Joanne Calderwood, 35 years of age. Jessica Eye, 34. That's kind of just the place that this division is. And we saw Calderwood, when she kind of made a full-time transition to 25, she looked really good.
She did.
For Jessica Eye moving from bantamweight to flyweight, she looked really good too. So it's just an interesting matchup that we have here. I don't really know as far as title implications that this fight really has, but we are up there on the cusp of the upper end of this division. So overall, it is an interesting matchup, and it does hold pretty major implications for the division.
It does, and it's an interesting fight because you have 2 people who at one time were thought of as top contenders. Of course, I fought for the title, and Calderwood probably should have been fighting for the title. Don't know who her manager is, but laid an egg on that one. Calderwood, I was always really high on her, and she was always one of those fighters. I don't have a good read on Joanne Calderwood. I can admit that right now. I always think she's better than she really is. I had the opposite problem with Stipe. Like, I never think Stipe's as good as he really is, even though I understand, like, Stipe's one of the greatest fighters ever. But for Calderwood, like, in my mind, she's got great Muay Thai, and I always think of the inaugural women's flyweight fight. And you're probably thinking, what, was that on The Ultimate Fighter? No, there was one women's flyweight fight all the way back at UFC Ottawa.
Valerie Letourneau, I mean, the Canadian.
Craig out here stealing my thunder before I could say it. So she fights Valerie Letourneau, and she not only fights Valerie Letourneau, knocks her over with a spinning back fist in the 3rd round. Like, it was an extremely impressive performance in that fight, and it was in...
A lot of Canadian connections in that fight,
A lot of Canadian connections.
TriStar at the time.
So for Calderwood, she has really good stand-up, and we've seen a lot of the shortcomings in her ground game, and I'll be honest, I don't think anyone's shooting for a takedown in this fight. Jessica Eye might, if she's noticing that if Calderwood can get into those clinch positions, that's her best spot by far. She's got really great elbows coming over the top. She's really good at getting her opponent against the cage and making them pay for it. And you brought up the Andrea Lee fight. That was her last win. Yes, it's a split decision. She beat Andrea Lee quite badly in that fight. She was able to enact her game plan of, I'm going to get you to the cage and I'm going to unload on you. And Andrea Lee has that great lateral movement. Calderwood's good at cutting off the cage, and that's something that even high-low fighters do struggle with that. It's one of those sort of... It's been lost, I guess, really, in MMA as a whole. Calderwood's really good at forcing her opponent back to the cage, and Jessica Eye, she's got a weird boxing style, and I'm going to bring up a name that we probably talk about her too much. She's got a little Cindy Dandois-esqueness to her, where it's not that my striking is good. It's just that it's a frustrating style. I am going to be throwing punches constantly, and it's a case of you're not going to want to get hit by them, but it's not going to ruin your career if you do get hit by them. Like, Calderwood is the better striker, I would say, but the fact that Jessica Eye can just frustrate her with her volume might mean that I could win a decision on the feet.
We got the fight wrong on the Holloway Cater card, but you did bring up the Cindy Dandois in that, and the fact that Vanessa Mello, when she took on Sarah Morris, what's Vanessa Mello going to do? Keep her arms out there and strike. What happened? Vanessa Mello kept her arms out there and struck, and Sarah Morris decided to go Maria Sharapova on it and just yell and back up and not wrestle, which he's good at,
and raise her
Mello's
hands even though she lost.
So in that fight, again, you had one person that didn't want to engage, and Vanessa Mello did, and it was a lot of single shots, but she won that fight. These two fighters are A, much more high level, and B, will engage. So I expect them more to kind of crash in the middle. Jessica Eye's not one to be on her back foot. You talk about the boxing. If you look on Tapology, they're about 3 years behind in the fact that they still have strong style fight team as Jessica Eye's gym. She's been in Vegas for a long time now. And Joanne Calderwood out of Syndicate, the John Wood connection there, she's been there for quite some time too, training with the likes of, who do you want to rattle off? Serena De Jesus, Roxanne Modafferi. We can go on and on and on. They have a lot of good fights.
Buddy who slammed Matt Wyman? Forget his name. Great knockout.
Jordan Levitt.
Thank you.
Jordan Levitt. So, yeah, they do have a lot of good fighters at Syndicate, too. And in the area, there's a lot of good fighters. But for Joanne Calderwood, again, the last 3 fights have been weird because you lose the decision to Caitlin Chukagian. Well, what does Caitlin Chukagian minus that one fight against Antonina Shevchenko do well?
Awesome. Going backwards.
It's a lot of volume. The Antonina fight, she became a wrestler. She wins the fight against Andrea Lee, and again, you talked about it. She won that fight, even though it's a split decision. Andrea Lee's been on a weird run of losing lately, which you just don't expect out of her. And in that Maya fight, there was a layoff, and then she was supposed to get the title fight, but she didn't, so she fought anyway. And just like when Frankie Edgar should have just waited a little bit longer, Calderwood lost. So she's in a weird spot. For again, Shevchenko, Araujo, Calvillo. That Araujo's the fight to point to because we talked about it in Viviani's fight against Roxanne Modafferi. And you could be watching it before that fight happens. We could look like geniuses. Or B, you watch it after and we're totally wrong. But Jessica Eye was able to kind of disrupt the flow of Araujo, and she looked really good in that one. And if she fights like that in this fight, I think she'd be able to get a win there.
I agree 100%. There's going to be a lot of 50-50 exchanges in this fight. And I'm going to sound condescending, but I really don't mean it this way. If you don't know what that means, in a lot of fights, you will just see every time both of them do meet for an exchange, they're just both landing pretty much the same level of strikes. And then you look at Holloway Cater, for instance, and Holloway's perfect. And I'm going to hit you, then I'm going to get out of the way, then I'm going to hit you again. We're not going to see a lot of that out of these two. It's going to be a lot of both them throwing at the same time. And I do just kind of see it that way for 15 minutes. Neither one's going to go for a takedown. I know we've seen more of a wrestling style, if you will, from Calderwood as of late. Not that it's in her style, but she will shoot for more takedowns, at least in this stage of her career. I just don't see her being able to actually secure the takedown against someone like Jessica Eye. And for Jessica Eye, again, I'm kind of the opposite with Eye that I am with Calderwood. I always think too highly of Calderwood. I'm going to be the first person to tell you right now, I don't know where to put Jessica Eye's skill set in the 125-pound division, because you think, okay, you lose to Valentina, no shame in that, arguably the women's GOAT, and then you beat Araujo, oh wow, like you're back, and you beat a top contender, and then you lose to Cynthia Calvillo, who, I gotta be honest, like that fight wasn't that good. Calvillo won it, but it wasn't a fact of Calvillo just looked like this absolute world beater at 125. It was, this is a lower level main event, and Jessica Eye's coming off a title fight, so you can have her be one half of the main event.
Well, yeah, title fight loss, then a win.
Exactly. So for title implications, you could kind of get away with making that a main event. I just don't see Jessica Eye as that main event caliber fighter. And not to say I see the same for Calderwood. I just like some of the strikes of Calderwood more. I think if she can avoid the 50-50 exchanges of Eye, if she can get Eye up against the cage, you're going to be able to avoid a lot of the fire but coming back your way. Struggling with my words right there. You can avoid a lot of those punches coming back your way. Because for Eye, again, she's so boxing heavy. You're not going to see kicks. You won't even really see leg kicks out of her. She's got that very unique... She's a very wide style or stance for a boxer. She will keep her legs very wide apart and try to lean into a lot of her shots to accentuate the power. The issue is she doesn't have a lot of power to begin with, so I don't see that being what puts her over the edge to become like a knockout artist at 125.
The nice thing with Eye, and you talked about it really early on, the fact that she cuts the cage really well, and you hear that at the highest level of MMA, and you might hear it at the lower level, but in the reverse, where so-and-so is chasing fighter X.
Well, the Sarah Morris fight.
They're always chasing. The Sarah Morris fight against Vanessa Mello, which was just a weird one. Jessica Eye, really good at getting that lead leg out there, cutting off the cage, landing her combinations, back up, back in, back up, back in. She has really good movement. Calderwood on her back foot, she does do a good job of circling away from power. She does a great job there, and you talked about it, the 50-50 matchups. And both of these women have extensive UFC careers, so you can take the stats with a grain of salt. Joanne Calderwood lands a lot more, but she gets into those firefights in the middle a lot more too. So you might see the striking advantage or disadvantage. It definitely goes by way of Joanne Calderwood when compared to Jessica Eye. Also take into account Jessica Eye took a lot of damage in the fight against Valentina and got finished. And in terms of the grappling, maybe a slight edge in terms of the number to Joanne Calderwood. Probably wouldn't expect it in this fight, but if you did, maybe more so at a Calderwood than you would at a Jessica Eye. So overall, a very interesting fight. In terms of the Tapology votes, 689 of them, 77% going Calderwood, 86% have her to win by decision. If we have a look at the odds here, Matt, got to flip my paper. Jessica Eye open to plus 120. She's now minus 105, still an underdog. For Calderwood, open minus 140. She's now at a minus 119. That gap is closing, and the money's coming in on Eye. How do you see this one here?
I never thought I'd pick Jessica Eye in another fight. I think Jessica Eye is going to be able to get this done. I do, and I do think it's going to come down a lot to those 50-50 exchanges where I don't know if the judges just see something in her that they don't in other fighters, but a lot of her fights do go to split decisions, and she does fight close fights no matter who she fights. She'll fight to the level of her competition, and sometimes that's a good thing. Like in the Araujo fight, she really showed that I'm more than just this sort of basic boxer type. Whereas Calderwood, we can see the wrestling of her sometimes, but she'll wrestle herself into exhaustion every now and then. And her striking, she's good offensively moving forward, but there is a bit of a weakness on the back foot, like you had mentioned. She does do a good job of circling, but the issue is she can be held up against the cage herself. And I would kind of argue that is a strength for both of them. They can both cut off the cage. They're both decent defensively, but I'm going to side with Jessica Eye. I do think she'll just get the slight advantage in some of the exchanges. And for the odds being this close, I don't mind going with the underdog.
If Joanne Calderwood brings a full game set, like your skill set, like you know that she can, there's definitely an opportunity for her to win. Again, I see it in the odds. I see it in the Tapology picks. I will side with you, though. I do like Jessica Eye in this fight. Again, what have you done for me lately? And that's a terrible thing in all pro sports. But you look at that win over Araujo just a year ago. I can see a glimmer. You look at a split decision win from Calderwood over Andrea Lee, and she was supposed to get a title shot off of it, and it didn't happen. And then the Maia fight. Maia had her chances, I guess you could say, in that Shevchenko fight, more so than anybody else ever did.
She did pretty well, I would say.
She did all right, and she finished Joanne Calderwood, so it's pretty difficult to try and figure it out. But yeah, I'm going to go with Jessica Eye in this one as well. So we both have Evil Eye to get a win in this fight. Let us know down below in the comments who you have. Our co-main event, Chandler taking on Hooker. Our main event, Poirier taking on McGregor for a second time. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Matt, and big time shouts are due to our sponsor. Support for Fight Night Picks is brought to you by Manscaped. Who's the best in men's below the waist grooming? Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Matt, I opened the show by saying I was going to talk about my balls, so let's talk about it. I shave my nuts in the shower. I've done it for quite a while. I did it this morning, actually, and it is very enjoyable with these Manscaped products because, again, I was the type of guy that would cheap out. I'd buy the $30 set from the department store. Everything was metal. You're not supposed to use it in the shower. It rusts out. You don't want rusted out stuff near your nuts. You don't want to nick your nuts with rusted out stuff. You don't want tetanus. You don't have to go in and get a shot and explain. I nicked my nuts with a rusty old shaving kit.
You're not explaining anyone to this like the first time.
But overall, you don't want that to happen. You know that. I know that. And I don't want that to happen to you. And overall, if you end up with Manscaped, they've redesigned the electric trimmer. The engineered team has perfected the greatest ball hair trimmer ever created and recently released the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0 in Canada, the UK, and Australia, the Commonwealth coming together to accept Manscaped onto the team. When I tell you it's premium, I mean it's premium. It's great stuff, and they have a ceramic blade that reduces grooming accidents. And I talked about it. I shave in the shower. That light is key. If you're shaving in a cave, if you're underwater, this stuff works incredibly handily in your hands near your nuts. Overall, it's great stuff. Waterproof technology. You can groom in the shower. One of the coolest features is that light. And they've also upgraded to a 7,000 RPM motor with quiet stroke technology. And let's not forget about the charging stand. I talked about this a lot around the holidays. If you're going to have friends over, hopefully you were safe. But you'll be safe. You put that puppy on the vanity, and you're going to rock the washroom. People are going to be so impressed. If you're on Zoom and you're giving us a walking tour of your house and somebody sees that, they're going to think, wow, that guy's got his life together. So overall, it's a great charging stand. You can show it off loud and proud. It's intelligently designed. It's great stuff. And if you're listening to me speak right now, I want you to experience this and a whole lot more firsthand. Let's get that bush and tush clean. Matt, if you order the perfect package over on their website...
What does it come with, Craig?
You get a great pair of boxer briefs. Now, I'm a boxer briefs guy. These work very well, and they fit me good.
Wow.
I wear a medium shirt, bulking up to a large here soon.
Don't know about that.
But look at that shirt. It actually is a great shirt. Your balls will thank you. The Perfect Package is a great kit. It comes with the leather carrying case, which is a must. If you go with this, I'm a nose hair guy too. Kind of sucks. But you can use the weed whacker in your ear, in your nose. I'll give you a demonstration because I actually stand behind it. I've had the cheap little nose hair removers, and they're bad. And sometimes they can nick your nose, and it sucks. This actually works very well. The other two things that the Perfect Package comes with, the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, it's a salve. You put it on in the morning. Nice little pick-me-up. But if you really want to pick me up, the Spritz with the Crop Reviver Ball Toner. It's great stuff. So, get 20% off and free shipping on your order with code FNP at manscaped.com. There's a link down below in the description. And make your testes your besties. I cannot emphasize this enough. Matt, you've got the Perfect Package 3.0. Works pretty good.
I'm a big fan. Like, Craig had to go to his bathroom to get all of this stuff. It's not like we just have a box laying around. Like, these are products we not only like, but, like, we hope you can enjoy them, too, because they do actually get the job done.
They do work very good. So get 20% off and free shipping with code FNP at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the promo code FNP. Your balls will thank you. And Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks,
let's get into it.
Don't nick your nuts. This is one of those fights that gets me up in the morning. We have the Hangman Dan Hooker taking on the former, he was Mr. Bellator, Iron Michael Chandler. And Matt, yes, Iron Michael. He had a cup of coffee, I guess you could say, with Strikeforce before he got scooped up by Coker and the boys with Bellator. And this guy has been a consummate professional with Bellator. You look at the fights that he's had, and you want all-time fights to go out there and watch. Michael Chandler against Eddie Alvarez, a great rivalry there. Also had a budding rivalry with Ill Will Brooks, if you can imagine that.
The first Benson fight's phenomenal.
The first Benson fight, he's got a win over Patricky. He's got a loss to Patricio. Michael Chandler is one of the more exciting fighters that you're going to find out there. And it's kind of a shame that he didn't get to really reach that pinnacle of a main stage like the UFC until later on in his career. 34 years of age here. He's been a Tennessee boy for the longest time. The guys at MMA On Point have had 101 interviews with this guy. But it's been great because people get to realize just how good of a fighter Michael Chandler is. And if you've started this video off and thought, guys, doesn't matter, he's going to lose to the UFC guy, you might be wrong. Just wait. This guy is a great fighter, and so is Dan Hooker. And that's what makes this fight so entertaining. Because from what we've seen out of Dan Hooker in his UFC career, he's gotten better as it's gone on. And yes, he was that guy.
I hope so.
He was that long, drawn-out, skinny guy like Matt and myself at 145 pounds. He moves up to 155 and continues to have success. And you look at it, the knockout over Ross Pearson, the submission over Mark Chikasi, the knockout of Jim Miller, the knockout over Gilbert Burns. This guy was on a heater until he fought Edson Barboza, and it almost derailed his career.
That's one of the hardest fights to go back and rewatch. Like, I love rewatching fights that just either have them on in the background while I'm getting other work done, or just whatever. I love watching fights. We probably wouldn't be doing this if we didn't. But I, can't go back and watch that fight. I've tried to. There's moments in there, though, where, yeah, Dan Hooker's organs became mashed potatoes, thanks to old Edson Barboza. Weird fight, and Edson just got off to such a great start. He was landing with the leg kicks, and it's weird. Dan Hooker, we see this a lot with people, so maybe I gotta stop saying it's weird, but Dan Hooker offensively with his leg kicks is phenomenal. He will bust your leg up. He did Paul Felder. He did it great against Ali Quinta. That's really when they were brought to the forefront. But he doesn't check them himself, and it's odd, because for a guy who's such a high-level kickboxer like he is, normally we see it with Adesanya, his teammate. Adesanya checks every leg kick. Alexander Volkanovski checks every leg kick. Defensively, they are extremely sound, whereas Dan Hooker, it seems like he's the odd one out. He's the black sheep of the gym where he's just offensive-minded. And as a fight fan, I love watching Dan Hooker fight. You might not like his personality. He's a little cocky. But him inside the cage is one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC. And I don't think that's much of a hot take. And I love this matchup, too, with Michael Chandler. Because for Chandler, I might have been the minority. I didn't really want to see him fight a Dustin or a Tony Ferguson at the time. Or even a Khabib. That's a big ask for a guy in his UFC debut. You have to take into account octagon jitters, just the fact that he's fighting in Fight Island. There's just a lot of circumstances surrounding this fight. I like the Dan Hooker matchup. Hooker, he lost to Dustin, who one of the better fighters ever at 155. They have a classic fight. You know what kind of fight you're going to get from Dan Hooker, and you know what kind of fight Michael Chandler wants to bring. So the UFC did a perfect job matchmaking this fight, I think. They're going to get you another one of those Dan Hooker car crash types of fights. And that's the problem for Dan Hooker. I'm starting to get to the point where I don't really know where his not longevity, Zach, because I do think he can be a top-level fighter for a very, very long time. But his durability at a certain point is going to start to fall off. And I know we're going to talk about that in the main event too for Dustin. But Dan Hooker, let's just look at 3 fights and isolate these 3. Edson Barbosa. I can't rewatch that fight. That's how bad it was. Paul Felder, he wins a split decision in his hometown against Paul Felder, and those boys lumped each other up. Like, it wasn't just like, ooh, they kind of struck at distance. Like, they won Fight of the Night, nominated for Fight of the Year, one of the best fights of last year. And to top it all off, he decides, I'm going to have one of the greatest fights ever with Dustin Poirier.
Let's have a round of the year in that one.
Exactly. And it's not just like he's accepting damage. He can give it out, too. It just, there's always a certain point in a Dan Hooker fight where he turns into a wrestler. And I understand when you look at his last 2 fights, they were both in a 5-round atmosphere. And it was round 4 and 5, in which he did start to use his wrestling a lot more. But as a primary striker, and as the guy who offensively is really as good as anyone in the sport, being Dan Hooker, it's a weird sort of game plan shift. And I don't know if it comes down to cardio-wise, once he does start to get tired, he likes to rely on his ground game more, because I like the submissions of Dan Hooker. I can't deny it. Off his back, he's not great. He will kind of get stuck there sometimes, and he'll look for rest and just sort of inopportune moments. But on top, he's got great elbows from top position. The submission against Mark Jacasey was quite nice. Again, Jacasey not really on the level of the other guys we talked about with Dan Hooker, but the fact that he's been able to go out there and show a good, at least basic understanding of submission shows that if Chandler goes out there and gets a takedown early, I think Chandler definitely has the better ground game out of these 2, but Dan Hooker won't just be completely lost on the ground. And I think that's an important point to bring up, because Hooker and Chandler, listen, they're probably going to go out there and have a crazy stand-up war. But Michael Chandler is one of the most explosive wrestlers in the world, and I don't think people remember this. Like, have you ever seen the videos of him and Kamaru Usman training?
That's where I was going to go.
Yeah,
That's
go
where I was
for it.
going to go. So you look at Michael Chandler, and you look at the record that Dan Hooker has, and let's pick out a couple of the names here, because there's one that really, jumps off. The Jim Miller fight, but the Gilbert Burns fight. And Dan Hooker can go into this one thinking, well, he beat Gilbert Burns, and now he's going to be challenging for a title at 170. Who's one of his main training partners? Iron Michael Chandler. Boom, boom, here we go. City kickboxing, right off into the sunset. Gym of the year, 3 years in a row maybe?
Or it's the other way around.
Who knows? Or, again, yeah, it's the other way around. For Michael Chandler, this is the weird thing, and you might hear a narrative like this. Multiple-time Bellator lightweight champion. That's true. He was Bellator's guy forever. He made his debut with Bellator back at their edition number 31. He took on Creed Scott Stapp. It wasn't arms wide open Scott Stapp, but he did take on Scott Stapp back in 2010, and he was with them forever. And Matt, for Michael Chandler, I remember you showed me this, and it was Bellator. It was either 130, it was 138 when he fought Derek Campos, because that was a card that you had, Ken Shamrock took on Hoist Gracie?
It was.
Or
No,
Ken Shamrock
Kimbo.
took on Kimbo Slice, and they had like a mini documentary about it. And you were like, look at this guy, Michael Chandler. And that was back, 2015. Getting really into Bellator then. And Matt, if you've been a Fight Night Picks fan for maybe a week or maybe a year or maybe a month, we're Bellator guys. You might not see the Bellator videos at the top of the marquee because they haven't really had events in 2020, but we've been Bellator guys for a very long time. Michael Chandler is the Bellator guy. You get excited about his fights, and it's must-see TV for us, whether it's the Bellator Prelims 101 guys or it's on a Saturday night in a big event. And when it was in a Saturday night big event, and I remember we ordered the pay-per-view, Bellator NYC, that was such a funky fight where Michael Chandler fought Brent Primus. It was for the title. Chandler was coming off of the big win over Benson Henderson, a split decision, and everybody knows Benson, one of the best lightweights of all time. And it was weird because there was that nerve that got pinched, hit, kicked by Brent Primus. Chandler was hobbling around, and the referee ended up coming in, slowing it down. Doctor comes in, it's over. And we've seen that happen in MMA since then.
Yeah.
That was one of the first times that we'd seen it, but we've seen that happen since then. So, Chandler has to go back to the drawing board. He beats Gyoti Yamauchi, and I get it.
He khabibed him.
Hey, Gyoti, make weight at lightweight. I know he's not allowed to fight at lightweight anymore because of his last time out, but Gyoti Yamauchi, very fun fighter. Fights with a super long karate stance, and his ground game's great. And like you said, Michael Chandler beat him from pillar to post. Then he fights Brandon Gertz. He picked him up and slammed him and separated Brandon Gertz's shoulder.
And still choked him.
And choked him out. So that was one of the craziest wins you'll see. The Brent Primus rematch, the second round was a little chintzy if you're a Michael Chandler fan. Primus got his back. Primus at the time was 8-0, and he has great jiu-jitsu. He's a guy that comes from the Pacific Northwest. You're never going to hear a bigger Brent Primus champion than Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen is a big Primus guy, but you'll see him with Submission Underground. You know how good of a wrestler and jiu-jitsu guy he is. Chandler after that, he won the first round. After the second round, took over, wins that fight. And then he gets knocked out and loses his title to Patricio Pitbull. And that's the one that a lot of people are going to focus on going into this one. And we should too, because in the first round, Patricio starts, Patricio is a pocket rocket of a fighter. He was already the featherweight champ. He's now the lightweight champ. Bellator's letting him stall it out because he hasn't fought a lightweight since May of 2019. But he runs through opponents. Go watch his fight against Pedro Carvalho if you want.
Unless you're Pedro Carvalho, I don't recommend
if you want a bit of an idea of that one. But he gets starched there. So then he comes back and he fights in the the New Year's Eve type cross promotion shows that Bellator had at the end of the year with Ryzen. And he beats Sydney Outlaw. And listen, I get it. Sydney Outlaw, Brent Primus, Brandon Gertz, and to an extent, I love Yoti Yamauchi, so I'm biased. But those guys are not top 15 level UFC fighters. I get it. But when you beat them the way that Michael Chandler's beating Sydney Outlaw, first round knockout, the way that you're submitting Brandon Gertz, where you pick him up and slam him, and Brandon Gertz a solid guy. And I get it.
You just got done telling me he wasn't.
Well, he's a solid guy unless you're a shoulder. But he's solid physically. He's a solid guy. Hanging out with his pit bull all the time. And he gets a win like that. That's amazing. The way that Michael Chandler beat Benson Henderson this summer was disgusting. It was crazy. He hit him right on the forehead and pretty much knocked him out cold.
Which is... Michael Chandler has a lot going for him, but... It's weird. Michael Chandler's a bit of a glass cannon, and I'm not afraid to say that. He gets rocked at a minimum in most of his fights. Even go back and look at the Goiti Yamauchi fight. Yamauchi was able to catch him with like this weird crescent kick in the middle of the cage, and it definitely hurt Michael Chandler. Now, I'm not saying, he's crazy chinny by any means, but if Michael Chandler has a weakness, and again, we're dealing with like the top 5 people who can make 155 pounds fighting, so he's very, very good. He is a little chinny, and Eddie Alvarez was able to hurt him. Derek Campos, he beat the brakes off of course. But we have seen in some moments him get clipped and him get hurt. And that does worry me against a guy like Dan Hooker. It's interesting, though, with this fight. I don't see this fight going to a judge's decision at all. Like, this is one of the more confident fights I've ever had. Because the fact that Michael Chandler isn't the most durable guy in the world, like, that is his one shortcoming. And on the other side, Dan Hooker arguably might be the most durable fighter in the UFC. Just a really interesting clash of styles. And for Michael Chandler, I would like him to shoot a takedown as fast as possible in this fight. I understand he's got phenomenal power in his hands, but as a technician, he doesn't come anywhere as close to what Dan Hooker can do. And for Chandler, it is a lot of, I have so much power in my hands, I'm just going to rely on my punches. Whereas Dan Hooker, knees, elbows, kicks, punches, like whatever Dan Hooker has in his body to use as a weapon, he will. Whereas Chandler, it's I'm going to take you down, submit you, I'm going to ground and pound you, or I'm going to try and knock you out with my hands. And yes, it has worked for him for a very long time, but it does worry me a little bit for Chandler. Coming in the UFC, fighting a guy like Dan Hooker, if he's not able to get the takedown, I do think he could knock out Dan Hooker on the feet. Like, if he lands a big overhand right, you know how good Michael Chandler is, he can knock out anyone. It's really hard for me, though, to rely on a guy who's fighting a guy so much taller than him, first of all, who has such a big reach advantage, who can stand so far away, and who could also use his kicks. Like, if Dan Hooker, I don't think he will. If he wanted to make this a boring fight, he could. Like, if he wanted to just do leg kicks and jabs and walk around the cage, he could probably get a win that way. But with Chandler, if he shoots for a takedown early and can get it, I see him mopping the floor with Dan Hooker on the ground. And it's unfortunate to say because I do like the ground skills of Dan Hooker, but the ground and pound of Michael Chandler will open up a submission eventually. Like, Dan Hooker, the majority of the grapplers who he has fought, other than Gilbert Burns, but he himself admitted that wasn't the best Gilbert. Gilbert cut a lot of weight. Jim Miller at that stage of his career, not really going to make you pay if he takes you down. Marcin Casey, not much of a submission guy. Ross Pearson, same thing. Jason Knight, good on the ground. He was able to control Dan Hooker quite a bit, but again, different weight class. That was a long time ago. You can't take much from it. Dan Hooker's never fought a guy who can at least give him the ground and pound or the submission threats that Chandler can, and that does worry me. Against Dustin Poirier, he was getting the takedowns, and Poirier does have really good jiu-jitsu. He doesn't get the credit for it, but Poirier would go for a submission and get on top or sweep him. Like, Poirier was able to get into a dominant position almost every time they were on the ground. And Dustin Poirier, I think he's a phenomenal grappler. I don't think he's as good of a grappler as Michael Chandler, though.
With Michael Chandler, too, and this is one of those things that I have to throw out there, a little bit of a grain of salt. And Bellator normally does a good job with this. Again, Bellator guys. But if you go and look at the tail of the tape for Michael Chandler fight over fight, he gains 7 or 8 inches of reach, and then he's back again. Like, they have him listed as 74-inch reach. Then they have him 69, 72. Most of them, 69 inches of reach. He does have kind of smaller arms, so I sided with it in our graphic, went with 69 inches of reach, but maybe it's 74, who knows.
Michael Chandler's like Nene. No one really knows how big he is.
We'll figure that one out. So, in this fight, again, the one fight that I point to for Dan Hooker is a huge, bright spot. It is that Jim Miller fight. Again, you said it. I don't know if I totally agree, but Jim Miller
had Lyme disease and was 400 years old.
Wild ground game. We've seen that from him recently, and that knee was crazy. So if you're Michael Chandler running in there, you got to worry about the straight up attacks from Dan Hooker, whether it's a push kick, a front kick, a knee up the middle, an elbow, an uppercut. I mean, Dan Hooker's really lethal when it's in that range. Michael Chandler, You know how Jerry West is like the silhouette of the NBA? Michael Chandler should have been the silhouette for Bellator with overhand shots, because this guy goes full extension. And this is going to sound really weird. There's nothing prettier in MMA to watch than a huge overhand punch landing. Chuck Liddell, Aaron Pico in the fight against John DeJesus, if you want to see one with Bellator. Or Michael Chandler, the way that those guys land. Huge extension, lots of power. You leave your chin open, but lots of power, and they normally connect for those guys. So for me, I love this fight. Again, if we talk about the Tapology votes, Matt, 651 of them, 65% going with Hooker, 62% of them of those voters have him to win by knockout. If we look at the odds, Hooker open a -160. He's now -126. And if you look at Chandler open +140, he's now +102. So that money is coming in on Iron Michael Chandler. And again, I can't stress this enough. This might be my favorite fight on this card.
It's a great card. This fight's going to be great. Like, the co-main and main, again, the whole card is going to be very good, but this reminds me of UFC 236, where you look at the card and you're like, there's some good fights, and then the co-main event's Adesanya Gaslam, and the main event's Holloway Poirier, and you're like, well, no matter what, those fights are going to guarantee. It very much feels the same way with this pay-per-view. I've been going back and forth, even while we've just been talking about this fight. I am going to side with the former Bellator lightweight champion. I like the ground game Michael Chandler a lot, and I do think the Poirier fight exposed some of the shortcomings in the grappling of Dan Hooker. And again, Dan Hooker can knock out Michael Chandler. Dan Hooker could knock out any man alive. But the fact that Chandler, the chin worries me a little bit. If he can avoid those long, drawn-out exchanges, though, I think he can get the fight to the ground eventually. If Michael Chandler decides to go out there and just strike with Dan Hooker for 3 rounds, though, he's going to go to sleep. I need to see the wrestling early on from Chandler, because if he is able to mix in the ground game, keep Dan Hooker thinking. And that's really been the key of everyone who's been able to beat Dan Hooker. If you look at Yair Rodriguez is like fighting a windmill. Like, he's just doing so much at a time. It keeps Dan Hooker thinking. And I think it's the case. Shout out to the 2011 Mavs, one of my favorite basketball teams ever. They broke LeBron James. They were like, okay, you're so smart when it comes to basketball IQ. We're not going to do anything conventional. To me, it feels like Dan Hooker's fight IQ is at such a high level that when you do start throwing in different looks, it's not that it overrides him, but it's just like, oh shit, like this isn't how people normally fight. And if you can give him a lot of looks, you can beat him. Michael Chandler can pull that off, I think.
Fortis MMA connection with what you just said and Deron Williams. But when we look at this fight, I kind of look at it in a simple way. You saw Carlos Condit take on Matt Brown here recently. And what did everybody say? For Matt Brown to win, throw it back to that Wonderboy Thompson fight. You got to work those takedowns. You got to work that top
pressure.
pressure.
Everyone, you mean us?
It started out early like that, but Matt Brown's also 40 years old, and he's taken a ton of damage throughout his career, not just inside of the cage. And he just started to get tired. And also, Carlos Condit
the ground game
went
of Damian
full grappler, and I've never seen him wrestle like that in my life. So for Michael Chandler to win, you got to pull a Matt Brown against Carlos Condit in that first round and work those takedowns early. Because if you go in there with the mindset of, and Michael Chandler is a bit of a cocky guy. You got to toss that one up to him too. Like
they both are.
Yeah, they're both cocky guys. And you need a little bit of that.
I like both of these guys a lot, okay? I'm not saying it's a negative.
You need some of that gusto in the game. But if you're Chandler and yeah, you're really cocky and I'm Mr. Overhand Right and I'm going to land it on Dan Hooker, you could face yourself in a world of hurt. So I will side with the former Bellator lightweight champ as well. He's not current. He lost it a long time ago, but overall, I just wish Chandler was in the UFC like 5 years ago.
I agree.
Right now.
I think that's the big point you have to take away from this. After his first premise loss, I don't know if it was immediately after that, but it was within that time, he had re-upped with Bellator and decided to re-sign a contract with them. And it feels like we did miss out on 3 or 4 like good Michael Chandler UFC fights. I'm not saying he's past his prime, but he's at least near the end of his prime compared to where he could have been if he did decide to come over in like 2016 area. So I think we are going to see a very good version of Michael Chandler. I don't think this is going to be like a Ben Askren where it's, you know, he's been off for a long time and there's some questions about his level of competition in the first place. I really like Chandler in this.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight, and it might be a surprise to a lot of people. We have Michael Chandler to get the win. Let us know for absolute nut jobs down below in the comments section. But overall, I love this fight, and our main event is going to be something to pay attention to. We have Dustin Poirier taking on Conor McGregor, the rematch at 155 pounds. And while this fight between Hooker and Chandler may have possible title implications, you know that main event does between Poirier and McGregor. So keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks, man, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
It is finally time for our main event of the evening, your featured lightweight bout, UFC 257. We have the rematch between Dustin the Diamond Poirier, Theo Von's favorite fighter,
My favorite
and
fighter.
the notorious Conor McGregor, seemingly everybody's favorite fighter. Matt, this is such a good fight stylistically. Again, it's almost like the rematch had to happen. You lump Max Holloway in there because he wants to be maybe an alternate for this one, and you have a true threes company up there at the top. But overall, such a great fight. I know with McGregor, you have the layoffs in between, but you pick out the wins. The Diaz win was great in the rematch. The Eddie Alvarez win, that was prime Conor McGregor. That's the best we've ever seen Conor McGregor look. And then in the fight, in the rematch, the return, when he took on Donald Cerrone, we had it as, and maybe controversially, our 2020 move of the year. One of our top 5 nominees was just the shoulder strikes from Conor McGregor. And Matt, we talked about this throughout this entire card. We've seen more boxing moves kind of employed in MMA. You saw it with Carlos Felipe and Justin Tafa last weekend. Head-to-head, we're going boxing. Ottman Azaitzar, who's on this card, taking on Matt Frevola, going wild to the head, and then when he notices his opponent's hurt, he'll go to the body. McGregor in that fight going in for the clinch, shoulder strikes, back off. You have the kick. You have so many great moves from Conor McGregor, and it almost looked like he hadn't missed a step in that fight. He really did look good going in.
He looked phenomenal against Cowboy, but here's the couple things you have to remember. Cowboy had been knocked out in 2 straight fights leading into that, and that fight was up at 170, and this is something that it always gets brought up when they talk about Roy Jones Jr., how once he went up to heavyweight, he was never really able to come back down and weight. It was just, once you do let your body get to a certain size, the weight cutting doesn't get easier as you get older, and a lot of people were worried about that for Canelo, for instance, after he went up and fought Kovalev. For McGregor, I don't think it will be an issue because we've seen him fight Nate Diaz at 170 and then come down and fight at 155. Just something you always do have to think about when you do deal with a fighter who can switch weight classes because, listen, Conor McGregor at 32 is not the same fighter that we got back in the Eddie Alvarez days. And Bill Simmons once did this on The Ringer where he didn't just make a basketball team, but he took like the vintages. Like if you took every fighter and you just took their best fight, like what would they look the best in? The Eddie Alvarez fight for Conor McGregor was as perfect of a fight as you can possibly have. And listen, I love Eddie Alvarez. And the fact that he was able to go out there and really just have like a flawless performance against Alvarez means really more than anything else you could do in the UFC. Everything that happened after that, though, has definitely changed him as a fighter. You have that massive layoff. You've got the weird Bellator thing where he jumps into the cage. You've got the whole bus incident. And you've got the Khabib fight. And I know people are trying to start this narrative. Really, Conor's the one who's been starting it. And he has a lot of fans, so people are going to reverberate what he says. Is that, oh, he's scared of me and he's running. It's not the case at all. Let's just be honest and say this right now. If Khabib wanted to fight either one of these guys, he would. Because here's the thing. Khabib's already fought both of these guys and beaten them both. And I love Dustin Poirier. By far my favorite fighter. I don't mind being a little bit biased and admitting that. I don't even want to see him fight Khabib again. Like, that fight was one-sided enough where I'm like, okay, he probably doesn't beat him. But with Conor, quit trying to lie to your fans to change the whole narrative.
The weirdest narrative that I've seen going into this fight is that we're just totally forgetting about the Donald Cerrone fight that started 2020. Yeah, 2020, because we're 2021 now. It's difficult sometimes. And a lot of people are saying, look at how poor Conor looked going into fight week against Khabib. That was the reason why he lost that fight. They cut to the press conference where he was drinking, and they cut to this and that. And, well, he wasn't in fight shape for that one. But he's in fight shape for Dustin Poirier. Did you forget the fight against Cerrone? I get it. Donald Cerrone was on a downtick, a massive downtick.
Still is.
He hasn't looked like the same fighter for a while when he became Father Cerrone. But going into that one, Conor looked great. He looked amazing, and he said all the right things. He was very complimentary to the division. He was complimentary to Cerrone. You saw the exchange that he had with Cowboy's grandmother. Like, it was a wholesome Conor McGregor. We saw all the things that we needed to see. But it's almost like for a lot of people, that didn't even happen. And he's been a lot like this coming into this fight with Dustin Poirier, complimenting Poirier. It's a fight that needed to happen. He's in fight shape. And you see him in camp, shaved head, smaller beard, and he looks good. Like, he doesn't look totally drawn out.
He's handsome, no.
Well,
that short beard.
He looks drawn. He doesn't look drawn out like he used to at featherweight, and he looks good for 155 pounds. And at 32, you're in your physical prime. So we'll have to see how all of that goes for him. At the same time, Dustin celebrating a birthday, coming in here at the ripe old age of 32 years and 4 days for this fight. So happy birthday, Dustin Poirier. And from Poirier, the thing that I worried about was after the Khabib loss, he was talking about retirement. I mean, Khabib was very complimentary with him. He had a major hip operation, and then he goes in there and he took a long time off between the Khabib fight and the fight against Dan Hooker, almost a year. And I was really worried about that because you go into a fight with Dan Hooker, and we talked about it, Hooker against Chandler. What's Hooker good at? Straight shots up the middle, elbows, knees, the jab, the cross. Like, you have to worry about
striking
a lot of things with Dan Hooker, but not a lot of looping shots. If Dustin Poirier is going to close the distance, he could get hit. And Dustin Poirier has great whipping leg kicks. Will he end up being like a Jose Aldo before his fight against Marlon Vera, where it's like, we have hip issues, we have knee issues, we're not going to kick anymore? Because you know how good Dustin Poirier's boxing is. It's some of the best boxing in MMA.
And okay, we've been saying that a little too much just because like Poirier and Kattar just fought, or Holloway and Kattar just fought. I can't stress this enough. Outside of Poirier and Kattar, and it just so happens that their main events in the same week, this would normally be the best boxing MMA matchup of the year. Like, Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather. Don't know if you guys remember that. But also, Dustin Poirier, as a pure boxer in MMA, is absolutely phenomenal. Can switch stances really well, good defensively as well. And something I like from Poirier, I noticed this a long time ago. I'm going to pat myself on the back a little bit. He's right-handed, but he fights as a southpaw, and it didn't make any sense to me. But when you watch him fight, he loads up on his right hand a lot. When he gets a guy hurt, he'll hit them with a left hand, and then kind of load up on the right and switch stances. It's something really smart that he does. And it's also very Michael Bisping-esque, where Bisping, he was left-handed, but he fought orthodox because he wanted his power hand to be close. And Poirier, a really good diversity of strikes off of his right hand, because he will throw a check right hook, he will throw a left straight into an overhand right. I really like his combinations moving forward. We saw that a lot against Dan Hooker, where Dan Hooker would land his combo or move forward on Poirier. And Poirier just kind of gets to this point where either his back's against the cage or he's just been in a crazy fight. He just gets this look on his face, he's like, fuck, another one of these ones. And it just, all of his fights end up that way, where he's going to be in there, and it's going to be one of those blood and guts type of fights. And I don't really like what I was hearing out of Conor McGregor leading up into this fight, where I'm going to knock him out faster than I did in the first one. I can't guarantee you much in life. I can guarantee you this fight is not going to end quick. I do see one of those drawn-out brawls between these guys. I see this fight going a lot more in the way of like a Nate Diaz-Conor McGregor fight than I do as a Conor versus Eddie. Because for Dustin, and again, we talked about it a little bit before bringing up the Dan Hooker fight, one of the more underrated ground games, not only in the lightweight division, I would argue in the whole of the UFC. Dustin, a really good black belt, great submissions, and a nice diversity of submissions too. He's got a phenomenal Darce choke. He goes for omoplatas. It's something that doesn't get brought up enough about him, and I feel like it should. People are always like, Jose Aldo, he does have that black belt in jiu-jitsu, but we just never see it. Poirier's in that same boat. It's just his striking is so good, we don't have to see it. But when we do see it, Dustin Poirier on the ground is a problem.
And I mean, maybe you'll end up seeing Dustin Poirier riding on top of Conor McGregor like he did Jose Aldo on top of Marlon Vera in his last fight. And if you want to go back and cue that fight up, it was a great one. But for Dustin Poirier, if you think it's going to be a knock him out, drag him out type of fight, and you're questioning Conor McGregor's cardio, hey, maybe there's a great opportunity for Dustin Poirier in this one. And if you look at their overall career since they fought each other back in 2014, McGregor finishes that one. Poirier rattles off 4 big wins. Carlos Diego Ferreira, who was young in his career, Yancy Medeiros finishes him, beats Conor's buddy Joe Duffy, beats Bobby Green, loses to Michael Johnson, but Michael Johnson at one point was absolutely in fuego. Beats Jim Miller. There's a no contest that was really weird against Eddie Alvarez. Rattles off another big, long win streak. And listen, you got to say it. Former champion Anthony Pettis.
Destroyed him.
Later interim champ Justin Gaethje.
Knocked him out.
Former champ Eddie Alvarez in the rematch.
Knocked him out.
Featherweight champ that was moving up to lightweight and Max Holloway. And then he lost to Khabib. And then he has a fight of the year against Dan Hooker. Possible fight of the year last year. Round of the year for sure in the second round. For McGregor, since he beat Dustin Poirier, a very important fight. He fought Dennis Seaver in one of the weirdest fights that you could ever
the
make.
Ultimate underhand toss.
He beats Chad Mendes, which was a really good win. That's one of my favorite Conor McGregor wins because, again, you had to see him perform against a great wrestler. He performed through adversity and finished him in the second round. Starches Jose Aldo in the biggest highlight reel knockout you've probably ever seen. Diaz fights Alvarez, Khabib, and Cerrone. And now you come into this fight. So obviously Poirier's had more fights in that stretch. The big win for me that really stands out for Dustin Poirier is the win over Anthony Pettis, if I could really put things together. And we talked about this before we came on air. But for Anthony Pettis, what does he do well? When he gets into a rhythm of his own and his kicks are great, look at the fight that Anthony Pettis had, even in his last time out. And I get it. Pettis, when he fought Benson Henderson in WEC, Pettis, when he fought for the title in the UFC, is a totally different Pettis than the one that we saw fight Morono up a weight class before he left for the PFL. But Anthony Pettis, when he flows, his striking's amazing. When he has confidence, he looks great. Dustin Poirier stifled that, got it to the ground. I know there was a rib injury to Pettis, but still, the way that Poirier finishes that fight or gets to the finish, if you like that Dustin Poirier, then you love him in this fight.
I do. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think that's a great fight to showcase how good his ground game is, but I really do think the fight that you can draw the most from is that Max Holloway or even the Gaethje fight. And Gaethje's a little interesting because the story about Poirier, at least at 145, was always chinny. He can't take a shot all that well. He would get dropped or at least rocked in most of his fights. At 155, his chin's not only granite, like he has one of the best chins ever at 155, I would argue. The amount of shots he was able to eat from guys like Gaethje and Pettis and Hooker and Holloway, like Poirier in the Gaethje fight, he got hurt and came back, and we had never seen that before that fight. And it's wild to think that was in 2018. Like, it had taken that long for him to actually get into a situation in his career where he gets rocked by a shot, he has to come back and win. That third round, let's just showcase the fight quick. Gaethje's landing a ton of leg kicks, but Poirier's landing better to the head. In the third round, though, Gaethje, the leg kicks are starting to add up. Poirier's looking tired, and Gaethje lands a clean overhand right that hurts Poirier. Poirier gets his back up against the cage. He's smart defensively, works his way to the end of that round, and then knocks out Eddie Alvarez knocks out Justin Gaethje about 10 seconds into the fourth round. Like, if you don't get Poirier out of there when you have the chance to, he just doesn't go away. And Luke Thomas brought it up, something I like to laugh about too. Poirier looks exhausted the second he walks into the cage. Like, he'll throw 2 overhands, and he's just... I'm like, no. This is when, like, the hands of time, all the wars are starting to catch up to him. Doesn't really get tired, though. Like, some of the better cardio in the UFC, and it's weird because he can match together a high volume with a good level of power and keep a pretty sustained volume throughout all 5 rounds, which is something we don't see often. And he's a guy who will weaponize his pace if he has to. He doesn't always rely on that. In the Holloway fight, it was more, I just have to keep pace with Holloway, not let him run away at the end. Whereas with the Dan Hooker fight, it was Dan Hooker started out strong, and Poirier was the one who had to outlast him. So he can fight in both those styles, and it'll be interesting to see what he decides to do with Conor. Will Dustin shoot for a takedown in this fight? Because I think it will be interesting. If he does at least shoot for takedowns and make Conor think about the ground game being a threat, it'll open up the rest of his arsenal, I think, quite nicely. Whereas for Conor, he's not going to be shooting any takedowns. We know that. For Conor, I'm just curious how many kicks is he going to throw? We've seen kick-heavy Conor, and we've seen boxing-heavy Conor. We've never really seen both. I bring up the Eddie Alvarez fight. Don't even really think he threw a kick in that fight. It was just, I'm really sound boxing. I'm going to have really nice trunk movement, move back and forth like a viper. And then we see in his fight against Cowboy, he throws one head kick, even in the first Poirier fight. Like, he throws that weird hook kick. He has a nice assortment of strikes. It just always depends on when he wants to use them and when he doesn't want to use them.
Conor McGregor in the fight against Eddie Alvarez threw 1 leg kick.
There you go.
3% of his overall strikes. But you're right. With Conor McGregor, if he strings everything together, and listen, you're talking about the best MMA fighter, the most popular MMA fighter of all time, it's hard to really nitpick.
Let's not say he's the best of all time. We don't need that to be the hot take of the podcast.
It's hard not to, or it is hard to nitpick certain things. So in that Cerrone fight, again, perfect fight against a guy that was definitely on the downtick. It's a great win to put your name back out there. And obviously, if we had stadium shows, you probably would have seen him a few more times last year, but you didn't. So you get this fight with, 2,000 fans in attendance or so out of the arena that they have. It's not the small Fight Island stage in a tent. It's a full-size arena show here. It should be a really good one. And again, you bring up styles make fights. Dustin Poirier looking tired, and even with his back up against the cage, so many different attacks in Dustin Poirier's arsenal, even from that spot.
He landed one just combination against Dan Hooker, and I was shaking my head because Dustin Poirier, like, when it's right, he almost looks too good. Like, there's some points in Poirier fights where he has his back up against the cage, lands a jab and a straight left, moves out of the way of like 2 hooker shots. It just kind of gives him a look like, really, you think you can hit me with those? And of course, that fight was really ugly, but there's always portions in his fights where you look and you're like, okay, if he decided not to be this crazy, exciting brawler, technically he would be able to beat most guys in the division. Just the fact that Dustin Poirier, listen, there's a reason he's one of the more popular fighters in the UFC. I'm one of those OG fans, and I could ride that train really until he retires. But he's picked up a lot of steam, I would say, outside of just fight fans. Poirier's become, not to say he's transcended the sport by any means, but he's one of the more well-known MMA fighters at this point, I would argue. And I would just really, the only thing I want out of this fight is the best version out of both guys. Like, if Conor goes out there and starches a really good version of Poirier, if he makes it into the 4th round, let's say, and lands a nice shot, that's really all you can hope for. If Poirier, let's say, gets hurt in the 1st round, overcomes it, and comes back and beats Conor, like, that's all I can hope for out of this fight, because it is so hard to predict. You have 2 guys who are so good at finishing fights in such a plethora of different ways that it just makes this fight very exciting.
It's hot sauce versus whiskey. And I mean, for Dustin Poirier, you look at his overall wins, 7 of them by decision, 13 by knockout, 6 by submission. For McGregor, this is the craziest thing. Out of all the wins, 22 of them, 19 are by knockout, 1 by submission, 2 by decision. And you look at the decision wins. 1's over Max Holloway, which is very early on. This is the one thing I don't like. Everybody says it's so early on in Max Holloway's career, and it is. He only had 9 pro fights. Still pretty early on in Conor McGregor's career, too, and they were still both young at the time. And then the other decision win was in the Nate Diaz rematch at 155 pounds, down from 170. That fight was close, though. It was close.
And the Holloway fight, okay, Conor was already champ over in Cage Warriors. It's not like he was that young. Like, he had quite a bit more experience than Holloway back then. I don't think you can take a lot of stock. And I'm sure I've already seen it on Twitter. People are like, oh, you think Holloway's good? Just wait till you see Conor on Saturday. Like, when you tweet stuff like that, you might as well just put in your bio, I'm a casual. But just to get back on track, Conor McGregor has so many different ways to win this fight. But the same can be said for Poirier. The only difference is that I would say the most likely to get a knockout, of course, is McGregor, but there is a 0% chance he submits Dustin Poirier in this fight. Even if he's able to hurt him, I don't think the ground game of McGregor is good enough to, like, take the back of Poirier or anything. Where on the flip side, if Conor does start to get tired, which is a theme in all of his fights, and you can look at Dustin and say, well, he looks tired in his fights, but in the 5th round, he's still pretty much as fresh as he was in the 2nd, whereas with Conor, the pace definitely will get to him at a certain point. It's just he's starting at such a high level. Even Conor at 80% is still better than most other guys. I do worry about the cardiovascular Conor making his way back down to 155. That's really the thing. The added weight cut that he hasn't had to do in, well, a number of years now, along with the fact that his cardio has always been a bit of a question mark, it does worry me. What is this fight going to look like in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round?
If it makes it there, and that's a big thing, because if you're really in the corner of Conor McGregor, he's got to get it done early. If you're Dustin Poirier, rounds 3, 4, and 5, they're yours, and he should be able to get a win, you would think. The one thing that a lot of people point out, you're right, and you know, you get the contrarians that say it, Conor McGregor throughout his career, even with the Khabib fight being heavily weighted in terms of discounting the stat, 70% takedown defense throughout his career for Conor McGregor. His ground game, while offensively isn't that great, defensively very sound, and that's something that you have to point out.
I think a great comp for his ground game is Alexander Gustafsson. He's got great takedown defense, and his first move to get back up is really nice, but you can hold him down if you're able to control him. Chad Mendes is really able to prove that. The way that you kind of knew Khabib was going to beat Conor was Chad Mendes mounted Conor in like 40 seconds of their fight. And of course, Chad Mendes is a phenomenal wrestler. Like, I'm not predicting that for Dustin, of course, but we have seen that. I think the ground game of Conor is good, but I don't see it as a ground game. I see it almost as an extension of his striking, where my ground game is just getting back up to my feet. And I do like that. If you know what you're good at, just do what you're good at.
It's like a lighter Derek Lewis. You just got to get right back up.
No, it really is.
Back up. So in this fight, again, McGregor, it's got to be fast. It's got to be quick. You know the speed and the power. And speed and power aren't a combination that you normally get. It's usually volume and speed.
Timing beats power, though.
Timing beats power. So we'll see what happens. If we look at the overall votes on Tapology, 764 of them early, 73% McGregor, 90% see McGregor winning by knockout. If you look at Poirier, 27% of fans have him to win, 36% by decision, 24% by submission, 33% by knockout. If we have a look at the odds, heavily skewed Ireland's way. Poirier open a plus 150, now plus 230 underdog. McGregor minus 175 open. He's now a minus 290 favorite, and that line continues to go for Conor McGregor.
So if I could just do a minute on the odds, please. If Conor McGregor ever fights, just bet on whoever he's fighting against as early as possible. That's all you have to do. Or no, sorry, as late as possible. Because this is what happens with every Conor fight. He was the favorite over Khabib. Like, people don't really understand this. There's such a, and I hate using this word because it's not 100% true. There's such a huge amount of casuals who do come over and watch when Conor fights. And he's one of the few fighters who, he has fans outside of just the fight world. Like, we can talk about how Poirier is a big star, but he's a big star in the fight world. Whereas Conor, he's been really able to transcend just MMA. And he brings in so many more eyeballs that aren't normally adjusted to this sport. I think we could both agree, if we had to set odds on this fight, I might be a little out there. I would probably have Poirier at like a minus 150, and that would be the most generous towards Poirier.
McGregor. I would say McGregor, where the open, minus 175, plus 150
I'm
Poirier.
fine with that as well.
That makes sense.
It's ridiculous to see where they've come to, though, and it's just the case for every Conor fight.
And for me, yeah, I mean, at a minus 290, I'm not going to take a flyer on Conor McGregor. You might feel more than confident with that at home. And if you're a big Dustin Poirier supporter, again, like I said, rounds 3, 4, and 5, if we make it that far, Dustin Poirier can outlast just about anybody. You saw that in the fight against Dan Hooker. As the fight wears on, I mean, I hate to use a cliche, but he's battle-tested. So you've seen it out of him.
Max Holloway.
The Khabib fight, not the best one, but the Max Holloway fight, the Dan Hooker fight. And the thing that worried me about Dustin Poirier going into the fight against Dan Hooker, that hip issue, well, he continued to whip kicks out there. He always fights at a bit of a labored pace, but he stays on that bike the whole fight long. You don't really have to worry about him dropping off. Whereas Conor McGregor, whether it's at 170 or 155, the longer the fight goes on, that power bar continues to be diminished. So if you want Conor McGregor to win and you take him at his word that he said in interviews and social media, he's probably got to get it done in the first or second round, because if it goes on any longer, it's just kind of going into the hands of Dustin Poirier. If you're making a pick on this one, Matt, because we predicted it from just about every angle, who are you going with here?
If we've learned anything over the last, I'll just say year and a half, skills beat the knockout artist. And you can even just look at last weekend's main event. Max Holloway was the more skilled fighter than Calvin Kattar, but Kattar hit quite a bit harder than Holloway. Paulo Costa, Israel Adesanya. Costa definitely hits harder than Adesanya, but if you are really cerebral and if you are good enough defensively, you can overcome just the sheer power. And the fact that Conor has something else in common with those two other guys, his cardio is not great. And he will fade as the fight progresses. Whereas Dustin can go out there and have a bad first round. I won't be that worried. Whereas if Conor has a bad first round, things are just going to keep on getting worse for him as the fight progresses. And the other thing too, I see Dustin becoming more wrestling heavy as the fight progresses. I see him almost doing the Dan Hooker. And not because he'll be the one who's tired, but I do see Dustin as having quite a bit of an advantage on the mat, and especially if McGregor's starting to get tired and Dustin, whose cardio does seem to stay pretty much at the same pace throughout the whole fight, if by round 4, Conor, the fight's starting to get to him and he is getting tired, and if he shoots for a lazy takedown or if Poirier's the one on top, he's going to absolutely dominate him there. I really like Dustin Poirier. If he doesn't get knocked out in the first round, I think it's his fight all night long.
I'm going to take speed in this fight, Matt, because again, speed and power, and as long as you're not overly tentative. You saw it in the fight with Holloway and Kattar, the fact that Kattar couldn't figure out the amount of sheer volume that Max Holloway was throwing on. Holloway didn't even take time to reset.
So you predict McGregor will land over 800 strikes?
That probably won't happen. The same thing with Paulo Costa. Costa couldn't figure out Israel Adesanya whatsoever. And listen, this is such a great fight. It's a hard fight to even try and pick. The one thing that I really want to see is these two guys standing side by each at 155 pounds on weigh-in day when we go into this fight with question mark kicks on the Saturday, and I can say confidently, I'm going with fighter A or fighter B. But again, based on previous track record, you have to think. And listen, mind games, do they really play a factor? McGregor's the best at mind games out of all of MMA. It didn't work on Nate Diaz because he's about as dense as this sound ball.
It's kind of hard to talk shit about Dustin Poirier in 2021. Like, what are you going to do?
True.
Oh, you're exciting and you do a lot of work for charity? Like, oh, wow, I really want to see you knock him out. Like, it's one of the more difficult opponents, I would say, to really get into their head right now.
That's true. But overall, I do like McGregor in this one. Again, the speed advantage, just... A McGregor first round is tough to beat, so I will go with a McGregor first round in this one. We're differing on the picks, but Matt, I could not be more excited about this card. McGregor, Poirier, Hooker, Chandler, Azaitser, Frevola, Calderwood. Like, there's so many good fights. Tsarukyan taking on Nasrat Haqparast, Sanchez, Muradov. There's so many good fights. I can't stress it enough. Make sure you go back and check them out all the way from Albazi, Zhumagulov, up here to our main event. It's been a crazy last calendar year for Fight Night Picks, really. I mean, it was all on the heels of McGregor and Cerrone that we were able to pick things up and get to the point that we're at right now. It's all thanks to the fans out there. You've been supporting us with the merch at FightNightPicks.com, checking out the articles, the podcasts out there, the recap shows with Matt and John Franklin, early stoppage with myself and John Franklin, all sorts of great stuff going on at Fight Night Picks. So make sure you check out the rest of the content with the team. Toss us a like and the sub. We really do appreciate it. And Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks,
let's get into it.